Hey guys! How are you? Hope you are doing great, and yeah, I have a great story for you guys today. What if a person from our world reincarnate in Harry Potter universe or the wizarding world with a Magus chip? He will conquer the wizarding world and be the hero from the shadows. So let's start with any delay. Chapter 41, A Short Trip. Saturday, the 22nd of June, 1991. It's been a few days since Matthew returned to London with the Hogwarts Express. His parents were happy to see him. The last few days he didn't do much besides training and testing if his trace was completely gone. After all, he still had a warning free to use at the ministry. He didn't care if they noted that down in his files, since the ministry would be of no consequence for him at some point in the future. So he first tried a simple levitation spell with his wand. For a few minutes nothing happened. Afterward he tested a few larger spells out in his room. His trace was really completely gone. There were luckily no extra tracking devices placed in the homes of Muggle-born students. They probably didn't believe someone could remove the trace, especially a Muggle-born. Which would be actually hard since Matthew only managed it at this point in time with the help of his new runic language. Today was an important day for Matthew. It's the day when the Harry Potter canon truly starts. According to his knowledge of the books, had Dudley's birthday, and the Dursleys would take Harry with them into the zoo. The zoo they are visiting is the London Zoo, the world's oldest scientific zoo, and the only one with a reptile house in the vicinity of London and Surrey. The zoo not only had the zoo a non-magical part. At some point after its opening in 18,218, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures at the British Ministry of Magic sanctioned the establishment of a Magi Zoology wing to be hidden in plain sight at the zoo, in accordance with Clause 72 of the International Confederation of Wizards Statute of Secrecy. A Magi Zoology wing open for Magical to visit. Although he wasn't really interested in magical creatures, it was worth a visit. But the main reason for his zoo trip was obviously Harry. It was the first chance for him to leave a positive impression on him. He had no interest in being a part of the Golden Trio or bringing himself so recklessly into danger like they so often did. But giving Harry a few times a helping hand or tip, and just being friendly to him would bring him the assistance and friendship of the boy who lived and the Potter family, and later also the Black family through Sirius Black. Matthew arrived early in the morning in the northern part of the Regent's Park, where the London Zoo was located. He spent his morning exploring the Magi Zoological wing of the zoo since he only knew where Harry and the Dursleys would appear after lunch. The entrance to the magical part of the zoo was hidden behind a wall. Like the entrance to platform 9¾ he had to walk through into that wall and he would come out in an older looking part of the zoo. It was at least 80 years out of fashion, with old lampposts and steel cages for the magical creatures. He was able to see many different magical creatures here, but at most mid-sized ones and below XXXXX classification, since large ones like dragons or very dangerous ones like Nundus or chimeras were too risky to keep in the middle of London. If an accident would happen, it was impossible to cover up with that many possible deaths. But there were still many interesting creatures to visit. He already knew hippogriffs and unicorns from Hogwarts. They had some Abraxan and Pegasi there. And smaller creatures like Niflers, Pixies, Murtlaps, and more. The interesting ones were a Runespo, a large three-headed snake. Matthew was pretty sure that it was arguing between its heads, and a Zuvu, an elephant-sized 5-colored cat that originates from China. It was a large feline-like beast with a striped body, scraggly mane, 4 fangs that curled out of its mouth, long sharp claws, and a disproportionately long, ruffled multicolored tail. Zuvus were incredibly powerful and fast, capable of traveling 1,000 miles in a day. Unfortunately, all the magical creatures were behind the steel cages imprisoned by ward schemes, so he couldn't gather any materials or DNA probes from them. He could only scan them with the help of Sarah and collect some basic data on them which he added to his database. As lunch approached, he left the magical part of the zoo and returned to the public part. After a quick lunch from one of the food stalls, he entered the reptile house, where soon Harry and the three Dursleys with Dudley's friend Piers should arrive. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Matthew had to wait a while before a group of people entered the reptile house. First was a pair of adults, a big, beefy man with a large purple face. He had thick, dark hair, a bushy black mustache, with hardly any neck and mean little eyes. This was obviously Vernon Dursley. Together with him walked a thin, blonde-haired woman with nearly twice the usual amount of neck and large pale eyes. His wife Petunia Dursley. Before they ran two boys, one being scrawny with a face like a rat. This was Dudley's friend Piers Porkis, who always follows his lead. The other boy was very fat. He looked a bit like a pig in a wig. He had watery blue eyes and thick blonde hair. This was obviously Dudley, who loudly exclaimed that he wanted to see huge, poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. The pig boy instantly found the largest snake in the place and hurried to its window, where he pressed his fat nose against it. Behind the group trailed a small and skinny boy. He wore oversized clothes which made him look even smaller and skinnier than he really was. The boy had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and the brightest green eyes Matthew ever saw. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape. On his forehead, he could see a thin scar in the shape of a lightning bolt, or like one particular rune symbol, the Soilo. Soilo stands for sun and represents victory and protection. This was obviously the boy who lived Harry Potter. It was obvious that he did keep his distance so the Dursleys would forget that he was even there and he could enjoy a day in the zoo without troubles. Even Matthew was angered by the unnecessary underfed state of Harry, while the fat boy had too much. Harry watched the Dursleys as Dudley complained that the boa constrictor wasn't moving, and Vernon multiple times hit against the glass. As Dudley shuffled away with a "this is boring," Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. And it winked at him. Sarah, begin recording and scanning everything that happens between Harry and the boa constrictor. Create a new file with the title Parcel Tongue, ordered Matthew mentally, who stood a few windows away, but still in hearing range of Harry and the snake. He had a good view of both of them. As Harry looked around if someone was watching, he pretended to watch the reptile in his window. Harry began to communicate with the snake in hissing sounds. Parcel tongue. Matthew recorded the whole event. Since he knew the exact text from the books, he should be able to create a translator with enough data. Chapter 42, Parcel. Suddenly there was a loud and annoying shout behind Harry. It was Dudley's rat friend Piers Porkis who sneaked behind Harry. The deafening shout made Harry and the boa constrictor jump. Dudley. Mr. Dursley. Come and look at this snake. You won't believe what it's doing. Dudley came waddling toward them as fast as he could. Out of the way, you, he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast no one saw how it happened. Well, almost no one. Matthew could clearly see it. 1 second. Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leaped back with howls of horror. Harry had a shocked look on his face as he sat up. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank in a nice burst of accidental magic had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past Harry, Matthew, who was also approaching the boy, could clearly hear the snake hiss something to Harry before it also left the reptile house. The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass," he kept saying, "where did the glass go?" Matthew arrived in front of Harry while everyone else was still distracted or in panic. He stretched his arm out to help the thin boy up. "Nice to meet you, Harry," began Matthew with a smile. "That was a wonderful little trick you pulled there. I think we will meet each other soon again. See you on the train," whispered Matthew to Harry as he helped the boy to his feet before he left the reptile house while acting mysterious. While Harry stared at his back and wondered who he was, and how did he know his name. The group of the Dursleys were led by the personnel of the zoo to the office of the director, while Matthew left the zoo discreetly since he had enough of animals for one day and he accomplished everything he wanted. Scene break. After he returned home, he let Sarah analyze the collected data about Parseltongue. With the help of his knowledge from Canon, the AI could create a pretty accurate translation of the conversation. This would serve as a first basis for the dictionary. In the next few days, Matthew spent a lot of time outside looking for different garden snakes. He tried to communicate with them by using his limited vocabulary and gaining new data into Parseltongue. If he could become a Parselmouth, everything would be much easier, but at the moment he had only a few theories of their origin. One of the books he collected described the different magic users around the world, among them in India, where Parselmouths were apparently common, which is only a half-truth. Although they can communicate with snakes, it is a form of hypnosis and mind magic, by sharing and reading their emotions. This was commonly seen as Parselmouth in Europe, which isn't the truth. This would also explain why the Patil twins reacted the same as the rest of the Hogwarts students when it came out that Harry was a Parselmouth during the events of the Chamber of Secrets. Since both of them knew the difference, and most Parselmouths in Europe were historically rather dark. In reality, in recent centuries there was only one line of known Parselmouths, and Harry isn't related to them. The Gaunt family, who died with Morfin Gaunt as the last official member, based on the information of the Harry Potter books and the history books Matthew read, they always had a deep connection to snakes, which is proven how they only communicated in Parseltongue with each other. The last living, well at the moment half-living member is Voldemort, who framed his uncle, who died then in Azkaban. The Gaunt line descended from the Slytherin line, another family deeply connected to snakes. Sorlaser raised even a basilisk, the deadliest snake in the wizarding world, which was currently sleeping under the castle. Based on all the information he gathered, basilisks and Parseltongue seem to be connected through history, but there is another piece of magic connected to them. Everything about them originates from the oldest known Parselmouth in the history of the wizarding world. A dark ancient wizard by the name of Hippo the Fowl, who lived over 2,000 years ago. For his depravity he even had a chocolate frog card. Hippo the Fowl lived in ancient Greece and was known as one of the darkest wizards in the history of magic. It is rumored that Hippo the Fowl was one of Sorlaser Slytherin's ancestors, with it also Voldemort. He was infamous for being a pioneer in the field of the dark arts, becoming the first known wizard to create the basilisk, and he also spoke Parseltongue. But what if he wasn't born with the ability like every one of the Slytherin and Gaunt lines? What if he was the first Parselmouth? Matthew came to that conclusion because of another crucial piece of information, that at the moment only he knew. Harry spoke Parseltongue and he was a Horcrux. He would lose that ability the moment the Horcrux was destroyed, which was confirmed by Rowling in Matthew's past life. Harpo the Foul spent his life studying the dark arts, inventing many vile curses. At some point in his life, after much experimentation, he created the first known basilisk and additionally gained a deep understanding of the nature of the soul. Armed with his knowledge and ruthlessness, he deliberately committed murder with the intention of splitting his soul, and subsequently sealed it inside an object or living being with dark magic, becoming the first known wizard to successfully create a Horcrux. What if he didn't use an object as a container for his Horcrux but the basilisk he created, which was an unprecedented feat of magic? A kind of magic nobody really studied deeply before, and maybe through the connection with his basilisk's soul, he gained the ability to communicate with snakes. That ability may have integrated itself so deeply into his soul, that it became a bloodline which he passed on to his descendants. For now, Matthew had no way to confirm his theories, but they sounded too plausible to be a mere coincidence. If Harry made a child while carrying the Horcrux, it may also have the ability to speak with snakes. This would be a topic that required more data in the future. Learning Parseltongue through translation was just too hard. A few single words or sentences are possible, but more is a very hard task even with the assistance of an AI chip inside his mind. On a side note, next week Matthew would have again to attend exams for his non-magical education. He finished all the homework his parents sent him to Hogwarts with the help of Morgana and was pretty much ready for it. The 8th year curriculum wasn't much of a challenge for him. History was mostly about ancient British history, a bit Arthurian legends which were actually interesting. Learning the non-magical perspective of Merlin and Morgana Le Fay was pretty funny. He also spent some time scanning all the science books inside the public library. It only took him about 2 weeks, since the library was smaller than Hogwarts. Although the few hundred science books gave him a good foundation for his further scientific studies and research. They proved useful during spell creation, like for his hexagonal shield charm. Chapter 43, Polyjuice Potion. Originally Matthew planned to improve the Polyjuice Potion recipe during his summer holidays, so he could use it to disguise himself during his future planned adventures. Unfortunately, Sarah didn't have enough data on the workings of the original potion to efficiently improve the potion. She could manage it, but it would take a few months. The Polyjuice Potion was a potion that allowed the drinker to assume the form of someone else. It was a highly complicated, challenging, and time-consuming potion that even adult witches and wizards struggled to brew correctly. The potion was incredibly advanced and had 2 separate parts that contained steps for each part. When its brewing was complete, the potion had to be stewed for a month before using. It could last for 10 minutes to 12 hours with its original recipe, based on how good it was brewed. While it could account for both age and gender, Polyjuice Potion could not be used for a human to take an animal form, nor could it be used on non-humans or half-humans. On a side note, that also meant Fleur, her sister Gabrielle, and probably also their mother were humans with Velar genetics, and not actual Velars, since they were considered half-humans. Which created another question: how do Velars reproduce if all members of their race are female? Since a Velar and a human produce a human with Velar genes, it couldn't be that way. Another question Matthew could research if he became bored and had the opportunity in the future. The recipe for the Polyjuice Potion could be found in Most Potent Potions, which was a book inside the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, which Matthew luckily already completely scanned with the help of his scan spell. But even his vast database of knowledge, magical and non-magical, wasn't enough to create an improved recipe in a short amount of time. Sarah's database missed unfortunately data about the actual effect of the potion on the body. Also recording and analyzing the actual brewing process would be also useful. Unlike beautifying potions, which change small parts of the body or even just glamour them, the Polyjuice potion remodeled the whole structure of the body, be it flesh, bones, skin, eyes, and hair color. He also wished he would have access to a thermic cycler or a DNA probe, so he could test if the potion would actually change the DNA of the human. But unfortunately, he was just a normal student. His mother couldn't just give him access to the hospital equipment since it cost a ton of cash. He asked her already. This kind of testing had to wait until he was older. Maybe if he would go study in a university after Hogwarts, he would gain access to this kind of equipment. Or he could try to reproduce them with magic, through runes and enchantments. But for now, he had to use the resources he had. After ordering ingredients from Sloane personally, who pulled some strings for him since some of them were a bit restricted, for actual potion masters or people who needed to work with it, he began the 1-month-long brewing process while letting Sarah record it. First, he had to add 3 measures of fluckweed to his brass cauldron. He used a brass one because that would shorten the brewing a few hours overall. After adding 2 bundles of knot grass, he stirred 4 times clockwise. Now he waved his wand over the potion and channeled his magic. It needed now to brew for the next 68 minutes. He used the short break to train a bit in his martial arts technique, but recently he felt he hit a bottleneck in his progress. Maybe he needs some actual experience in using his techniques than just repeating them perfectly and integrating them into his muscle memory. It was probably time to seek a local mixed martial arts school where he could spar with other martial artists. After practicing for an hour, Matthew returned his attention to his brass cauldron. After it changed its color exactly 68 minutes later, he added 4 leeches 2 measures of crushed lassoings to the cauldron. Now it needed to heat for 30 seconds on low heat before he once again waved his wand while channeling magic through it. This completed the first stage of the potion. After that he added 3 measures of boomslang skin and 1 measure of fine powdered bighorn horn. Now it needed to heat for 20 seconds on high temperature before again channeling magic through his wand. Next, thanks to his brass cauldron, it only needed to brew for 18 hours. The next day he added the last few ingredients before the second step was also complete. Now it just needed to brew for the next 21 days, while Matthew needed to stir it regularly. While the potion was cooking, Matthew didn't do much besides completing his non-magical exams and visiting the local library. Well, he visited a local dojo a few times, to gain some experience. Although he could beat the students similar to him in age, and a bit older. The students quite a bit older, especially the ones of a high rank, beat him quite easily. But he gained valuable experience which helped him improve his technique by leaps and bounds over the next few weeks. During this time the potion progressed perfectly. Sarah could gather valuable data on the changes of the magical energy particles inside the potion, while it more and more changed its muddy brown color. The constant heating bound the chaotic elements inside the potion to a stable concoction, while the harmful elements evaporated into the air. After 3 weeks of brewing, the potion was finally ready to be split into multiple doses. All they needed for usage was a part of the person he wanted to change into. He gathered different adult hairs during his visits inside the dojo, while nobody was watching. Fighting made people lose a lot of hair. He added a hair to his first dose of Polyjuice potion and ordered Sarah to record everything, the potion changed from his brown muddy-looking color into a dark steely one. It smelled now a bit like metal and wood. After observing the potion, he gulped it down in one go. Immediately, his insides started writhing as though he'd just swallowed living snakes. Then a burning sensation spread rapidly from his stomach to the very ends of his fingers and toes. Next, bringing him gasping to all fours, came a horrible melting feeling, as the skin all over his body bubbled like hot wax, and before his eyes, his hands began to grow, the fingers thickened, the knuckles were bulging like bolts, his shoulders stretched painfully, and a prickling on his forehead told him that his hair was creeping down toward his eyebrows. His clothes ripped as his chest expanded like a barrel bursting its hoops, and he began to grow in length. His feet were agony in shoes a few sizes too small. He should have thought of removing his clothes before changing into an adult. After resizing and repairing his clothes, he made sure Sarah had recorded everything. She would still need the data of the transformation back before she could begin improving the potion, but overall the data was promising. His body stats remained the same as the one of the original potion, so it wasn't possible to gain a higher strength by using the hair of stronger people. But it seemed logical, since he also remained a wizard, while he used the hair of a non-magical person. Matthew had now a muscular tall build of a person who worked out regularly. He had brown hair and a fierce-looking face. With his resized dark robes, he looked like an intimidating, dangerous wizard. It was time to visit a place he wanted to visit for a while, but with his child's body, it was too dangerous. Although he was confident he could defend himself and spot sneak attacks with his echolocation, there were just too many shady people like hags, werewolves, or questionable wizards, even vampires, in the place. It was time to visit Nocturne Alley. Chapter 44, Nocturne Alley. Matthew was ready to explore another part of London's magical shopping district, Nocturne Alley, who, like the other parts of the shopping district, was named with a pun. Diagon Alley, the regular shopping part, was named after Diagonally. Horizontally, the high-class part of the shopping district, was named after Horizontally. And last but not least, there was the shady part of the district, Nocturne Alley, which held many shops related to the darker and more illegal side of magic and business. That was also implied by its pun nocturnally, which meant nightly or dark. Unfortunately, he didn't possess a Flu network connection at home, since underaged wizards weren't allowed to possess one, which just shows how Muggleborns were discriminated against in the British Wizarding Society. These were just small things, but there are many of them. They also didn't possess a fireplace, so this would also be a problem for a Flu connection. With his disguise, he also couldn't ask his parents to drive him, since he didn't want to explain why he even was disguised. Since he didn't learn to apparate, although he wanted to, he couldn't risk splinching since there was no way to restore himself in the worst case. So his only choice was his short-range portal magic. The distance between his home and Charing Cross Road, where the entrance to Diagon Alley was located, was over 1 kilometer long. His short-range portal magic only allowed him to cross around half the distance necessary. So he would have to open the portal 2 times. First, he opened a portal to a remote small alley where he last year encountered the drug dealer. After he stepped through the blue rotating hole, he came out behind a big trash container. Nobody was luckily inside the alley. Although he felt confident enough to wipe memories with the observation charm, since he got enough practice last year, he still didn't want to use it too often on innocent people. Next, he once again formed a blue rotating portal with his magic. This time it led to a back street on Charing Cross Road, where the Leaky Cauldron was located. The back street he chose was right beside the Leaky Cauldron, where the anti-muggle charm was still working. So he didn't need to worry about getting spotted by an innocent passerby. Muggleborns and their parents still wouldn't come shopping, since the Hogwarts letters weren't delivered and other magical would either apparate into the back room of the cauldron or use the flue connection. So Matthew arrived at the leaky cauldron without getting any unwanted attention about his unusual way of magical transportation. He entered into the alley through the main entrance of the cauldron, under the curious gazes of the patrons there. They were probably wondering why he used the entrance to the Muggle world instead of one of the magical ones. But he had no choice in this matter. Next, he passed through the busy alley. Since it was already midday, many people were shopping or working here. He walked until he arrived at a corner of the alley where it was crossing with the shady Nocturne alley. It looked like a dark, twisting alleyway just around the corner of the bright and busy Diagon alley. The entrance was much gloomier in comparison to the entrance to the normal part. Nocturne alley was much barer than Diagon alley. There weren't as many witches and wizards there. Most of them gave off a darker feeling than the inhabitants of Diagon alley. They behaved fairly suspiciously and many hid their faces behind their hoods. Matthew also put the hood of his dark robe over his face and entered the dark alley. At first view, it was a barren alley with many shops, but after taking a closer look at the displays he spotted many dangerous or strange goods. The vendors sold things like shrunken heads, poisonous candles, human-looking fingernails, shady-looking trinkets, and medallions. This place was more dedicated to the dark arts. One of the first shops in the dark alley that piqued Matthew's interest was Mr. Mulpepper's apothecary. Although they also had a shop right next to Slug and Jigger's apothecary as direct competition, their selection there couldn't compare with them. Maybe here it was different since they had the chance to sell more ingredients of a questionable nature. The inside of the shop was quite dark and dirty. It was tended by an ancient-looking wizard with a wrinkled face and an unhealthy greyish color. There were many things on the shelves. Different blood samples of many magical creatures, eyes in glass containers hopefully only of creatures and not humans, and many more questionable products. Matthew bought a selection of different potion ingredients which were harder to get by in normal shops. They would be very useful in his experimentation. He also bought some of the blood samples, since he planned to study the different bloodlines of magical creatures. Although he didn't want to use them to enhance himself at the moment. He felt even if he created a Phoenix Dragon Basilisk hybrid bloodline that he could infuse into himself to strengthen himself, there is something more powerful out there. He also is far from a bottleneck in strengthening himself at the moment. So although preparation and studies wouldn't hurt, there was no need at the moment. On a bottom shelf behind the ancient shopkeeper was a vial with a golden blood-like fluid inside. But no matter how Matthew tried, the shopkeeper wouldn't sell him anything of it. This vial may be the reason for the sign on the front of the shop in the Diagon alley, "We don't sell unicorn blood, don't ask about it." Since the content of the vial suspiciously looked how unicorn blood was described in books. But apparently, the shopkeeper didn't trust him, so he wouldn't sell him anything of the interesting goods. Matthew decided he would shop here more often, to acquire more exotic goods in the future. After returning to the dark alley, he continued with his exploration. He found many interesting shops that he should check out in the future. Shops like Dystyle Phalanges sold many different kinds of bones, human and non-human. Unfortunately, he didn't have the tools to study them properly at the moment, and as potion ingredients, they were mostly too hard to be really useful in this form. Then there were shops like Cobb and Webb's, a shop dedicated to items related to the dark arts in general, or the Coffin House, a shop with dark arts materials, especially necromancy. a topic he had a great interest in, but he first needed a proper hideout to practice stuff like this. Ye Olde Curiosity Shop right next to Cobb and Webb's was also an interesting shop. It sold many curious items related to the dark arts. Maybe he could find an undiscovered treasure there. But first of all, his goal for this trip was the shop right next to it. If he had time later, he would check it out on his way back. The main goal of this trip was a shop every Harry Potter fan was familiar with, a shop located at 13B Nocturne Alley by the name of Borgin & Burke's Antique Shop. This shop was known to deal with many unusual and ancient wizarding artifacts. Not only artifact, but this was also the most likely place where Matthew could find books on topics that weren't available in Hogwarts. This shop was quite a historic place. Behind the dark and gloomy shop front was a place where even Lord Voldemort worked in the past when he was still known as Tom Riddle, probably the only workplace he ever had. Also in the future it would become quite important since it contained many important objects. Among them was the Vanishing Cabinet, a direct entrance to Hogwarts. Chapter 45, Borgin & Burke's. In the front window was an assortment of different artifacts displayed. Amongst them was an opal necklace. This necklace had a read the label, "Do not touch. Cursed. Has claimed the lives of 19 Muggle owners to date." This was the necklace Draco Malfoy bought in the future to kill Dumbledore in Harry's 6th year. Unfortunately, Katie Bell touched it accidentally while delivering it under the Imperious Curse and landed in St. Mungo's for the rest of the year. Matthew entered the gloomy antique shop, which was founded in 1863 by Messrs. Caractacus, Burke and Borgin through the entrance at the front. He entered the store, which was currently empty. It was a large, dimly lit wizard's shop that was quite dusty and dirty. The atmosphere inside the store was quite dark. There was a feeling of dark magic in the air, similar to the ruins of the Black Castle but not quite as powerful. The inside of the store looked similar in age and style to the rest of the wizarding world. There was a large stone fireplace at one side of the shop. Next to it was a glass case that held a withered hand on a cushion, a blood-stained pack of cards, and a staring glass eye. Evil-looking masks stared down from the walls, an assortment of human bones lay upon the counter, and rusty, spiked instruments hung from the ceiling. On the other side was a dusty bookcase full of books on different topics. Beside it stood a large black metallic cabinet. This was the Vanishing Cabinet connected to Hogwarts. It still should be fully functional since Peeves still didn't break the other one by dropping it above Filch's office in one of the classrooms to distract him, which happens in Harry's 2nd year. But Matthew wouldn't try it out since he wasn't sure if it got damaged before that event. Vanishing cabinets were quite popular during the First Wizarding War. It was one of the safest ways to anonymously vanish if Death Eaters should visit. Since it was unaffected by anti-apparition and anti-portkey wards, it was a good escape method. But Matthew wasn't here for the cabinet at the moment. He had enough time to acquire it in the future. First, he approached the glass case and observed its contents. Sarah scanned the objects inside the glass case. He requested mentally while waiting a few moments for the results. According to Sarah, the pack of blood-stained cards was a cursed artifact. Once someone touched them, they would begin to whirl around and attack the person and cut him all over his body. The only stop once the person would run out of blood. The staring glass eye was similar to the Eye of Moody, an enchanted eye that returns the user's vision once implanted. But instead of having the ability to see through objects and walls, it could see magic. Basically, it could see an aura around enchanted objects or a person. Based on the color, the user could discern what kind of magic was on the object or what kind the other person was casting. If it was harmful, it usually took a dark malevolent coloring. Lastly was the withered hand on the cushion. This hand was purchased in the future by Draco Malfoy. This was an artifact called the Hand of Glory, a dark artifact that gave candlelight only to the holder. Although it wasn't a very powerful artifact, it was quite a useful one. It could even shine through most spells and pieces of magic which created darkness, like the veil created by Peruvian instant darkness powder, which was resistant to most light creation spells. Next, Matthew headed to the dusty bookcase and began looking through the collection of different books on the topic of a darker nature. Unfortunately, most of them were available inside the restrictions section of the Hogwarts library. Only a few of them he saw for the first time. After picking a total of 3 books that he didn't read yet, he approached the wooden shop counter since the rest of the objects inside the shop was of minor interest to him. Although some of the masks on the wall had a historic value, they weren't really useful for him. He rang the old bell on the counter to call Mr. Borgin to the front of the shop. After a few moments, a stooping man had appeared behind the counter, smoothing his greasy hair back from his face. "Greetings, Mr. Borgin, nice to meet you," greeted Matthew with a polite voice while watching the other man. "Good day yourself, sir. A new customer, that's rare." "What a pleasure to meet you, mister," replied Mr. Borgin with his voice as oily as his hair. "Ah, how discourteous of me, my name is Magus, that's what people at least call me." He introduced himself while quickly making a name up. "I would like to purchase these books here, and would like to know if you have any rare books related to souls, magical constructs, dark magic, rituals, or necromancy for sale," he asked with a quiet and serious voice, making sure he couldn't be overheard from the outside while putting the 3 books he picked earlier on the counter. They were Practical Dark Arts, 100 Ways to Death, and Potent Rituals. Books that weren't available in the Hogwarts library, but something he would be probably able to locate in other stores here in Nocturne Alley. "Oh, I see a knowledgeable customer you are, Mr. Magus. These books are quite uncommon but practical," replied Mr. Borgin while flattering Matthew with his oily voice. "Unfortunately, I don't have any books on magic related to souls. They are quite rare and usually only available to very old families. Even if I gained some, I would first approach other customers since they would guarantee me quite the nice price. As for magical constructs, I don't have any currently since this is quite the exotic form of magic here in Britain, since we prefer transfiguration for similar effects, but I could keep my eyes open for you and contact you. As for the other topics, I have a few interesting books," he answered. "Well, I would be indebted to you if you could keep your eyes open. If you get your hands on any books related to soul magic, I would also pay you handsomely. I will visit your shop in a few months again since I will be traveling for a while and won't be reachable. Please let me have a look at your other books," said Matthew as he stared back at the greasy man while making up some excuses to keep his identity a secret. "Yes, one moment please," replied Mr. Borgin while returning to the back of the store. After a few minutes he returned with a pile of another 4 books. "These are the books that could be quite interesting for you based on your requests." Let me see," muttered Matthew while reading the titles of the books. Cursed Blood was the first book. It seemed to be about blood-based curses. The next one was called Animate the Death. It should be a necromancy book, but based on the title it was a different kind of necromancy Matthew had in mind. He imagined more something like returning life into death bodies, creating zombies, summoning ghosts and spirits. But like Inferni, the necromancy of the wizarding world was more about animated corpses. Next was a book called A Traveler's Diary. He had no idea what that had to do with dark magic, but it may be worth it. Last but not least was a book by the name of Rituals of Thy Body. The title was pretty self-explanatory and something that was definitely useful for Matthew. After checking the collection of books out, he returned his gaze back at Mr. Borgin. "How much for these 7 books together?" he asked while anticipating the reply. Chapter 46, A Strange Stone. To honor our future cooperation, I will give you an exclusive offer of only 500 galleons for these 7 very rare and regulated books, offered the greedy man with his oily voice. This fucking greedy asshole, even if these books are rare at most they would cost around 200 galleons. Thought Matthew as he smiled politely back at the business shark, and replied with a serious but still polite voice, Mr. Borgin, are you trying to cheat me? Although they are quite regulated, I would be able to buy them in other shops here in Nocturne Alley. At most I could offer you 50 galleons. Began Matthew to haggle. 50 galleons? Do you want to rob me, Mr. Magus? We could become good friends in the future, but we need to be fair to each other. How about 400 galleons? Counter-offered the greedy snake, Mr. Borgin. That's more like it, but still far over their value. How about 120 galleons? Replied Matthew, still trying to lower the price. No, I still need to make a bit of profit. How am I supposed to eat if I gift my goods away? 300 galleons is my last offer, offered Mr. Borgin with a glint in his eyes. That's still quite expensive. How about 250 galleons and you add that hand in your glass case to it and we have a deal? I would be then inclined to return for more deals in the future to your nice store, offered Matthew as a last effort. The Hand of Glory, you have picked quite the valuable artifact there, Mr. Magus. But to honor our future business relationship I will have to accept your offer. Accepted Mr. Borgin while faking his unwillingness. After all, he was still making quite the profit here, and the hand wasn't quite as valuable as he pretended. He stretched his hand out. Matthew shook his hand to accept the deal. After paying 250 galleons to Mr. Borgin, he took out his trunk and enlarged it. Meanwhile, Mr. Borgin retrieved the Hand of Glory from the glass case and handed it to Matthew, who put it into his trunk together with his new books. After shrinking his trunk once again and putting it once again away onto his necklace, he left Borgin and Burke's antique shop after saying goodbye to Mr. Borgin. Once again he stepped onto the shady alley. So that's finished, thought Matthew while observing the sky. Well, as expected, it wasn't that easy to gain books on souls. My only hope remains that place. Sarah. How much time has my polyjuice potion left? Asked Matthew, mentally hoping to make another stop. Estimated time remaining, 1 hour 32 minutes. Replied the mechanic voice of the AI inside his mind. Should be enough time, mused Matthew as he headed to the shop next door. He entered the shop named Ye Olde Curiosity Shop, located between Cobb and Webb's and Borgin and Burke's. Inside he found a small room with many different shelves full of different objects of all sizes and shapes. Behind the wooden counter stood a bearded wizard with dark hair who promptly greeted him. Welcome, customer, take a look at my goods. If you should have any questions, you can ask me. He began with a grumpy voice, while his eyes stared seriously at Matthew. Thank you. Don't mind me. I will just take a quick look around, answered Matthew politely with a small smile. He began to look through the different shelves inside the store. The store had quite the assortment of different things. There were a lot of goods that looked broken or just plain useless. There were broken brooms, some even with curses on them, on one shelf. Next, he found a collection of different daggers, some of them rusted, on most of them the runes and enchantments already faded. On some of them, he still could pick up remains of the enchantments, which were there to keep the daggers sharp or rust-free. They must be quite old or have gone through quite the fight to end up in such states, since they originally seemed to be of good quality. They were no use to Matthew, since he could just create the enchantments himself if he needed them. Next, he found a shelf with different enchanted clothes. None of them piqued his interest, since they were either plainly cursed to harm the wearer or had a useless enchantment on them, like putting the wearer's arms into the air on command and silly stuff like that. Then there were some old wands, but Matthew was quite happy with his and didn't need a second one, since he was quite adept in wandless magic. On some shelves were just some broken non-magical objects, like broken TVs, radios, umbrellas, car parts, or other things. One shelf even had just a collection of stones on them, as if to mock the customer. Matthew was prepared to leave the shop disappointed, because he hoped he would find some kind of hidden treasure, but everything was just useless. Until he suddenly heard Sarah inside his head. Beep. Picking up energy readings of a soul inside one of the objects, right in front of the host, on the upper shelf on the right back side. What did I accidentally stumble on? A Horcrux of someone, thought Matthew while observing the place which Sarah pointed out. It was the shelf with the collection of stones. In the right back corner of the shelf lay a strange-looking stone. It was yellow-white and shaped very strangely. It was multifaceted, made of a few cubes in different sizes but still hanging together. While one side seemed broken off, it had the size of the front of Matthew's thumb. Is this the Horcrux? Wondered Matthew mentally while observing the rock. Yes and no. This is the object which contains a part of a soul. Based on my energy readings, the complete soul should be more powerful than any human wizard. But this doesn't seem to be a Horcrux, more like a power source. More data is needed. The stone is just a small part of an about softball-sized object, answered Sarah while analyzing the stone. It doesn't matter if this is a Horcrux. It should still be useful to study souls, thought Matthew as he picked the strange stone up and brought it to counter where the bearded wizard was waiting for him. After pretending that he was disappointed that he didn't find anything of interest for him, he was able to fool the bearded shopkeeper that he was buying the stone as a decorative ornament. Unlike Mr. Borgin, the bearded shopkeeper didn't try to extort him, and he was able to purchase the strange stone for a few sickles. After putting the stone into his pocket, he left the store and headed back into the alley. It was almost time for him to turn back. He only had about half an hour of his polyjuice potion effect left. He headed back to Diagon Alley, where he once again dropped his hood, since it would only look suspicious here. He left the alley through the leaky cauldron again and headed back to the back alley. After making sure with a quick hominum revelio that he wasn't followed, he opened once again a blue swirling portal and landed in the drug dealer alley again. From there he jumped once again into his room. A few moments later the effects of his potion began to fade. His body once again began to feel on fire. The bones and muscle began to move back into their original places. His skin was bubbling again while he was shrinking considerably. After a few minutes, he once again was back to his normal form. Now he stood in his room with clothes a few sizes too big for him. He quickly changed into some comfortable clothes and checked if Sarah had enough data to improve the polyjuice recipe. Beep. Enough data gathered. Ready to make a few improvements. Estimated time needed, 12 hours 52 minutes. Should I continue? Just as he was about to confirm, his body began to feel strange. "Sarah, what is happening? Scan my body please," he requested hurriedly. Chapter 47, Early Spiritual Maturation. After a few panicking moments, Matthew heard Sarah's reply inside his mind. Beep. Scan complete. Host's body entered a state of spiritual maturation and is about to break through the bottleneck of host magical energy. The last few months spending in Peak's rank 1 wizard state was enough to loosen the bottleneck, so the host could enter the state earlier than other wizards. The Polyjuice potion was the last straw. The transformation of the potion triggered the early maturation of the host's body and forced the state. The host should place himself in a comfortable state and enter a sleep-like state through meditation, since wizards usually go through this process naturally in their sleep, but the host's circumstances are special thanks to the Azure Corn potion. No data on an early maturation inside the database was found. Starting recording the process. Oh, that's what's happening. Finally, I waited long enough after all, thought Matthew as his body continued to heat up. He quickly hurried to his bed and entered a comfortable lotus position and began to try entering a meditative state. While meditating, the hot feeling spread through his whole body from his head to his toes. He calmed himself down, using his occlumency and corresponding mediation method, and entered his mindscape, which should count as a sleeping state for his body. His consciousness appeared in his mental universe. The colors inside were flashing a lot more intensive and brighter than ever before. There was a wild, colorful storm raging inside his mind. The storm also spread through the whole space until his universe artificial created borders which served as his mental defenses. Shit, if this continues, my occlumency defenses will shatter again, panicked Matthew while observing the raging storm inside his mindscape. I need to do something. This is my mind and my body, and I am the master here, thought Matthew in a fit of rage as he concentrated on the storm. The wild storm of colors kept expanding and pushing against his borders. Matthew decided to try something. Instead of letting it push against his defenses, he tried to feed the overflowing energies of the storm into them, like when he built them. He had the theory that this raging storm was a mental representation of the spiritual maturation his body was undergoing currently, and before it finishes it had a lot of overflowing excess energy, so why not use it to empower his mental defenses further? He raised his hands and willed the energies that were pushing against his defenses to flow into them. Bit for bit the borders of his mental universe became more colorful and brighter. It worked. He was able to use the overflowing energy of his body to strengthen his mind defenses further. After some time that felt like hours, the colorful storm stopped pushing against his mental defenses. Instead, it began to shrink, but not really shrink. It began to get denser and denser. Instead of a white storm, it became a dense flow of energies spread through his whole mindscape. A few minutes later the whole process ended and his mental universe calmed down again. But the whole space changed. Instead of a few flashes of small colorful flashes of lightning inside his universe, they became much stronger and denser and consisted of multiple colors instead of a single one. The strength of his mental defenses also at least doubled, which was an unexpected but welcome boon for him. After Matthew made sure everything was okay, he decided it was time to wake up and leave his mindscape again. He disappeared from his mental universe. A few moments later Matthew, who still sat in a comfortable lotus position on his bed, slowly opened his eyes. It was already dark outside. He returned from Nocturne Alley in the evening, but it was still bright outside then, so at least a few hours should have passed during his artificial spiritual maturation, which the clock in his room confirmed. He made sure everything felt fine inside his body before he began moving. His whole body felt full of energy like never before. Standing in the middle of his room and moving every part of his body, just to make sure everything was fine, he began to mentally communicate with Sarah. "Sarah, did everything go well?" he asked while anticipating the reply of his AI. Beep. "Yes, the host's body seems in better condition than before, although the host has to reapply his brain capacity training spell since it got broken during the process. I recorded the whole process and will analyze the data now. Give me a few minutes, please." Continue. "Yes, do it, Sarah," he confirmed while beginning to wait. "So my spell broke, that's why my thoughts feel so fast. Damn, I can't wait to see how it will feel when the second stage of my occlumency training is completed," he mused while waiting for Sarah to analyze the data of his first spiritual maturation. After a few minutes, he heard Sarah's mechanical voice again. "Analysis complete. Host's bodies successfully completed an artificial spiritual maturation like any wizard would undergo after a lot of training, aging, or rituals would undergo. When a wizard reaches a bottleneck in his magical energy values, the excess energies will begin to gather in a part of his body while unavailable for usage until it reaches a critical mass or breaking point where it will begin to force the body through a maturation to accommodate more power. This stored energy is different from the energies used in the natural maturation a wizard undergoes twice his life. This energy is naturally gathered in a wizard's soul constantly. It will naturally force a maturation once at 7 where the wizarding child will be then able to control his magic, and a second time at 15 to 16. The host still has the energy storage inside his soul untouched and will mature at around 16 completely naturally. So that's how it works," wondered Matthew while comprehending the new information gathered through the analysis. "I wonder if my early maturation will bring me any unexpected benefits in the future. At least I am now far ahead in magical power compared to most students until their 5th year. I should have reached the level of a 6th-year student now. Sarah, please update my status and show me the new one," he requested while being excited about his new strength. Beep. Stats calculated. Displaying new status. Matthew Mason, Wizard, Rank 2, Strength, 2.5, Agility, 2.6, Vitality, 2.8, Magical Energy, 92.3, Status, Healthy and Energized. My physical stats also got a bit boosted by approximately 0.3. But I finally broke through the bottleneck and my magical energy level rose by over 10 alone through the maturation, and I should be now able to reach a level of around 200 before I would reach a bottleneck again," cheered Matthew internally while checking out his new status. "But that's not all, the energy feels denser and more potent than before. The strengths of my spells should also have risen," concluded Matthew as he felt the energy flowing through his body. "Well, I will have to test my spells tomorrow carefully. If I can my magic again at an appropriate level, I then also should reapply my occlumency training spells again. But first I need to test my control so I don't screw it up and turn myself into a human vegetable," thought Matthew seriously while changing into his pajamas so he could go to sleep. After silently washing himself inside the family bathroom, he quietly sneaked back into his room and entered his bed. A few minutes after closing his eyes, he quickly fell asleep. Although he felt energized, his body was still exhausted from the long day. Chapter 48, Improvement and More. The next day Matthew woke up early in the morning and had a nice breakfast with his parents before they left for work, since he didn't see them the whole day yesterday. After enjoying a nice breakfast prepared by his mother, he was finally alone at home. He changed into some of his workout clothes and entered the garden of their family home. It was time for him to try out the new strength level of his spells. After completing a spiritual maturation, he should have reached a new level. He needs to regain control over his magic and familiarize himself with his new power level. Inside the garden, he approached one of the thick trees, which he would use as his target for spell practice. After all, he didn't have any actual dummies with him, something he should note down to correct in the future. He decided it was best to start with a simple spell so he couldn't do much damage. But a tree was different from a practice dummy. A stinging hex would probably not indicate how strong he had become. The only spells he practiced on trees before were cutting piercing curses and the knockback jinx. He decided it was in his best interest to try the knockback jinx since he couldn't just repair the tree with a mending charm since it was a living thing. His mother would get angry at him if he destroyed their nice and homely garden. The last time he cast a knockback jinx on a tree it barely shook. He decided to first try it out without his wand since it would only make his spells even more powerful. After aiming with his hand he cast Fly Pendo. And a blue glowing projectile left his hand. It flew fast against the tree. The whole tree began to shake and even moved a few centimeters backward. A lot of leaves dropped from its branches onto the green grass of their garden. "Yeah, don't destroy the garden, my ass," cursed Matthew as he stared at the results of his knockback jinx. "Mom will definitely know someone, most likely I did something to the garden. Ha, damn it. Well, Sarah, can you compare the spell to my old strength level for me?" He requested his AI chip. Beep. Calculation complete. The knockback jinx became 72% stronger than previously recorded attempts. Ha, so my spells became almost 2/3 stronger than before. That's a nice power up for my age. But I will have to learn to control my new power, muttered Matthew while thinking how he should continue. He decided a nice way to become better was to clean up the mess he just did. So he began to practice gathering the leaves with his levitation charms until he was able to do it flawlessly again. After that he tried to vanish them while controlling his power level. It took a few tries to find the appropriate strength level. He mostly held too much back and only vanished a few leaves until he found the right level. After he finished cleaning up he began to practice with different kinds of harmless charms, like the wand lighting charm Lumos or the mist conjuring charm Fumos. He spent the whole morning practicing with simple spells before he prepared a quick lunch for himself. He finished his lunch and returned to the garden. It was time to continue with his wand. After he familiarized himself with his wand again, he moved to more advanced types of magic, like creating portals. The first few tries he failed miserably. They were either too small or in the completely wrong place, but after a while, he once again managed to open portals successfully. Next, he began to try cutting charms on a few leaves of the tree. He would target only single leaves and cut them as precisely as possible from the tree. Once he managed that, he felt he had once again full control of the strength of his magic. As his parents returned from work, they had a nice dinner together. After spending the evening with his parents, he retired to his room. It was time for an important spell. He needed to reapply the training spells on his mind for the second part of his occlumency. He once again carved the isolation formation onto the floor. He had no worries about damaging the floor here since he could easily fix it with the mending charm this time. After all, his floor wasn't alive. Once he finished charging the rune formation, he stepped into the middle of it and sat down in a lotus position and began to relax. Once he felt he was ready, he began to reapply the spell, This time he needed to do it twice since he already completed the first level of the spell. As he cast the spell for a second time, he once again felt a short but stabbing pain in his head, but this time much weaker than before. It was proof that he already completed a large part of the second level. After he applied the spells on himself, he felt that his perception was once again numbed down. Everything felt slower, but he had no problem with controlling his body and walking into things this time. After all, he already trained on this level for a while. Once he got the confirmation that everything was working correctly, he breathed out in relief. Now he was once again continuing his occlumency training. He would have to apply the third level of the spell after he returned to Hogwarts. Matthew was unsure if he should use the Room of Requirements while Kirillmort was inside the castle. After all, he didn't want to cause any unforeseen consequences, like him hiding the Horcrux somewhere else. Matthew had no worries about Kirillmort using Legilimency on him. After all, his occlumency shields were very powerful. And if he should manage to break through them, which he doubted he could in his wraith form, it would be another matter if he had his body back, but as a wraith, he was very weak, but in the end, his memories were still encrypted by Sarah, so nobody who broke into his mind could actually read them. But he had to make sure to prepare a set of nice fake ones so Kirillmort wouldn't get suspicious of him if he even tries to read his mind. But better be safe than sorry. After finishing reapplying the spells on his brain, Matthew began to clean up his room and fix the spell formation on his floor. Once he completed that, he began to prepare for sleep once again, but before that, he gave Sarah a few tasks to complete. Although he finished everything he wanted to accomplish before his Hogwarts shopping list would arrive, which was still a few weeks away, he could still work on some side projects. The first project he decided to work on was improved versions of the Polyjuice potion. He gave Sarah specifications for multiple improved versions. For his personal use, he decided to create 2 different ones. One with a similar effect to the original one but with a faster brewing time and a better taste. The second one is a permanent one with a counter potion to return the user's original form. Secondly, he decided to create an improved formula to sell to Slughorn's apothecary once again. A slightly faster version to create, but not much. Most importantly, it also should be tasteless. He believed this would bolster his passive income massively. Once everything was in order, he cleaned himself up and went to sleep. Since he had the next few days of experimentation before him. After a while, he fell deeply asleep. Chapter 49, Holiday Research. For the next few weeks, Matthew experimented with the Polyjuice potion formula, to create new ones. After experimenting with many different new formulas for days, he finally managed to complete 3 new Polyjuice potion formulas. Well, you could say 4 new formulas, because he additionally designed a counter potion for the permanent one, which actually works for all versions of the potion. It actually was a general antidote for transformations of any kind. In theory, it should also work on Tonk's metamorph Magus transformation. Maybe he would get in the future the chance to see her original form, who knows. This antidote was a very powerful and useful potion. Something he absolutely shouldn't share with the public. If any Death Eater got his hand on the formula, he would lose a very great advantage with his new potions. After all, with his new permanent potion he could permanently take on a new identity, but with the counter potion out there he would need to watch out for what he consumed. He managed to cut down on the costs of the potion and how long it needed to brew, but the difficulty got higher. It was now much harder to brew than before, but it only needs 3 days to complete. But with Sarah's help, he had no troubles in brewing any potions. He alone was already an experienced potioneer at this point. With the assistance of an AI, there was no potion master who could compare with him, at least in brewing. The potion he and Sarah designed to sell had also a few improvements in the brewing process. There was no longer a need to watch the moon cycle and prepare some ingredients a month earlier. It became also cheaper than before and only needed to brew for 3 weeks instead of 4. But most importantly, it had only a good taste after putting a body part in and didn't look like mud anymore. Instead, it was colorless and only had a color after the target's hair or something was put in. Once he completed his experiments and made sure everything was fine with them, he prepared some probes of the potion he would sell and a copy of the recipe and visited Sloane in Diagon Alley again. He pretty much got a meeting the day after he contacted him with Morgana's help. Again he made a nice contract with Slugs and Jiggers Apothecary for the potion, after Sloane himself certified and registered the potion for him at the ministry. They also directly made a contract with the apothecary and indirectly with him for a constant supply of the potion. Matthew would alone through this deal make 250 galleons a month. Scene break. After successfully completing his potion experiments and a good business deal, the date of the Hogwarts shopping list was moving closer and closer. He decided it was time to take a closer look at the strange stone he acquired in Nocturne Alley, the stone that maybe was Horcrux or at least something similar. With his current level of occlumency, he should be powerful enough to defend himself from any attempts to control himself. He took out the stone and observed it closely, although on first look it looked to be made of stone even with its yellow color. It was another material if you looked closely at it. It had a metallic shine to it and was glittering. Its form was also strange with its multifaceted cubic form. The surface area of the stone was very smooth, but it still had its metallic stone look. First, he tried to scan the stone with his scanning spell which he normally used to read books. After all, it was designed to find the composition of everything he scanned. The result was that the stone was made of a composition of multiple elements. Among them were all the minerals which were part of natural stones, different kinds of metals like gold, iron, silver, titanium, and even rare metals like molybdenum. But the most shocking finding for Matthew is that there were even a few unknown elements inside the stone that shouldn't even possibly exist. Unfortunately, the spell wasn't precise enough to show him the exact atomic model of the different elements, but this was already extremely valuable data for his future research. He may be able to discover new elements with completely new applications in the non-magical and magical worlds. This stone may be a gold mine for his future endeavors. As for the structure and purpose of the stone itself, Sarah concluded it was a magical artifact to store gigantic amounts of power for the user. A level of power unheard of in the wizarding world. This stone probably wasn't a wizard artifact. But according to the Ari's estimations, its creator was still far weaker than the being behind the scroll. All of these were only theoretical conclusions based on the scan itself. Even Sarah wasn't sure since she only had a part of the stone to work with. The whole stone may have a completely other purpose, and this part was only a bit of the energy source. The soul inside the stone was in strength level stronger than any human or wizard soul, but was much smaller. It was such a small piece of the soul that it wasn't conscious. The soul would need more parts of the stone to regain its self-awareness. Which was a welcome result for Matthew, since he now had a powerful soul piece to experiment with and begin his deeper studies into souls. Souls were a topic of major interest for Matthew, even if he managed to gain immortality for his body in the future. The soul would still begin to die after a few thousand years according to his current research results. So he would need to find ways to strengthen his own soul, which would also make his magic more powerful since both of them were directly connected. Matthew would spend the next few days with experiments on the stone. He would use many things to gain further insight into it. Amongst them, he also used the chaos runes for different kinds of experiments. He gathered extremely useful data on souls for the next few days. Scene break. Wednesday, the 24th of July, 1991. Today was the day his Hogwarts shopping list should arrive. It was the same day Harry would get his first one, and the Dursleys, especially Mr. Dursley, would go mad until they travel to the abandoned lighthouse on a small island, where Hagrid would pick up Harry for his first shopping tour through Diagon Alley. As Matthew was sitting with his parent at breakfast in the kitchen of their nice home, and Brown Owl arrived on their kitchen window. "Oh, it seems my Hogwarts shopping list is here," exclaimed Matthew as he stood up and opened the window. After taking the letter, he gave the school owl a few bits of their bacon before she left. "Do you need us to accompany you for your shopping?" asked his mother as Matthew opened his letter. "No, need Mom. I will make the trip this Saturday myself. You know how wizards are with non-magical people. I will manage it myself," replied Matthew as he began reading. "Okay, that's fine. I will give you some money to exchange again," said his father as he returned to his newspaper. "If you need me to drive you, just tell me." "Thanks to that, but it's a nice walk. I need the movement since I spent a lot of time in my room this holiday. The fresh air will be good for me." He finished the conversation. This time, besides the next grade of the Standard Book of Spells, there were only new books for his runes and arithmancy classes this year. All the other classes used still the same books. He wondered if he would meet many canon characters on Saturday. He was already anticipating his shopping trip as he finished his breakfast. Chapter 50, Golden Trio 1. Saturday, the 27th of July, 1991. After enjoying a nice breakfast with his parents, Matthew got ready and left their family home in Bloomsbury early in the morning. The moment he was out of sight, he looked for an empty place with a simple cast of Homenum Revelio. He made sure he was alone and unobserved. Once again he opened a blue swirling portal and traveled to the back alley of the Leaky Cauldron, with the help of 2 jumps again. His portal traveling method had some advantages compared to apparition and portkeys. For one, he didn't get uncomfortable because he didn't have to force his body through a small wormhole created with magic, and for the second reason, he wasn't trackable with the common wizarding methods. The Ministry and capable wizards had spells to follow wizards through apparition and portkeys. But that was because this traveling method was so common in the wizarding world and they developed spells for that a long time ago. His portal magic was uncommon if not unknown for them, so they couldn't track him through it and were unable to follow him until they knew of this trump card. Apparition and portkey wards also didn't work on it. Unfortunately, his portal had a far smaller range than the other method. Until he found more data or invested a lot of time into the research, he would have to live with this disadvantage. For now, he was completely happy with his method since he did not need more distant travel at the moment, but that would change in the future. So one of his next goals should be at least to study the portkey spell. This was a method that wasn't as risky as apparition since there was no danger of splinching. He arrived at the back alley of the Leaky Cauldron and entered the alley once again through the Muggle entrance. The Leaky Cauldron was filled with people this time. After all, it was once again for the students to do their Hogwarts shopping since their letters arrived this week. First, he shortly visited Gringotts where he took some wizarding money from his nicely filled vault, although he wasn't rich, he would be able to live comfortably at the moment with his current income. But for his research, it was far from enough, but it still helped. After his visit to Gringotts, he headed for Slugs and Jigger's apothecary, where he filled his potion ingredients up with materials for classes and his personal research. He always needed at least a basic collection of different ingredients in his trunk for every situation. And his discount helped him to finance it. Next, he visited a second-hand bookstore to take a look if he was able to find any interesting books he didn't read before, or if he found any books with some useful notes in them. After he only found some spell books that he already knew but had some handwritten notes in them, he paid for them and was about to leave the store, as the door opened and a group of redheads entered it. Matthew instantly greeted the twins. "Hey Gred and Forge, nice to see you. How are you holidays?" "Hey, Matthew, nice to see you too. You know how it is. Some pranking here, some preparations for the next year there. But pretty normal," replied the twins in their famous twin speak. Their answer earned them a stern glare of the motherly red-headed women behind there. "Fred and George, I don't want any more letters from school about any of your pranks this year. You should make yourself an example on Percy and focus more on your studies," berated Mrs. Weasley them. "Hello, Mrs. Weasley, nice to meet you. I am Matthew Mason, a friend of the twins. Although I am part of Ravenclaw, we still are good buddies," introduced Matthew himself politely. "Nice to meet you, dear. I hope the twins are not too much trouble for you," replied Mrs. Weasley with a smile. "Not at all. They are actually pretty entertaining. Any you underestimate them too much. They actually must have a big gift for potions and spell creation with all the pranks they created themselves," answered Matthew while praising the twins with the truth before their mother as his eyes fell on the other person that followed them. It was a young red-haired boy that had a bit of dirt on his clothes. "Oh, you must be Ron, Fred, and George's younger brother. Hopefully, we will see each other in Hogwarts this year." "Hello. Yes, I will start in Hogwarts this year," replied Ron in his typical way. "Well, nice to meet you. I think you will enjoy Hogwarts. It was nice to see you all, but I have to continue now since the list of things I have to finish is still long. Bye. See you on the train, guys," said Matthew as he left the store. His next stop was Madame Mackin's Robes for All Occasions, where he bought some new robes for school and new dress robes since he outgrew his last ones, and he once again was invited to Sloane's Yule Ball this year. After putting his newly bought goods into his trunk, he headed for the Quidditch supply store, where he bought the new Nimbus 2000 so he could study the flying enchantments on it this year. Last but not least, he headed for Flourish and Blot's bookstore, where he needed to buy his new school books for this year. As he entered the store, he spotted a girl with light skin, bright brown eyes, lots of bushy brown hair, and rather large front teeth. But she looked pretty cute and would most likely grow up to be a beauty. She was currently trying to convince two adults, based on their clothes non-magical, to buy some more books. This was clearly Hermione Granger, another member of the famous Golden Trio from the Harry Potter books, and her parents. Matthew approached Hermione and her parents and introduced himself. "Hello, nice to meet you. You must be a new Hogwarts student. My name is Matthew Mason. I am this year a third-year student in Hogwarts." "Hello, I am Hermione Granger and a first-year student. And these are my parents, Dan and Emma Granger. What do you want from us?" She introduced herself with a slightly bossy tone, but you could see that she was actually nervous. "Good day to you too, Mr. and Mrs. Granger. You are probably non-magical based on your clothes and Hermione's interest in so many basic books. I would like to recommend you some books that are extremely useful for first-generation wizards," explained Matthew as he continued the conversation. He explained the general situation of the wizarding world to the Grangers and recommended them some books that would help especially Hermione with the customs of the wizarding world, since she was basically entering and studying in another country with different customs. He explained all the things his parents would have liked to know. He spent a good while with the Grangers in the bookstore before he needed to complete his own shopping, so that's all you need to know at the moment. Since you like books so much, Hermione, you really would fit into Ravenclaw. We even have our own library and the older students study with the younger ones once a week. You would make many friends there," he explained as he tried to recruit her. But Professor McGonagall said that Gryffindor was the best house in Hogwarts. Even Professor Dumbledore attended there, and he is the current greatest wizard," replied Hermione. "Ha ha ha, that is so typical for Professor McGonagall. She always tries to recruit the promising students into her own house. Although Professor Dumbledore was in Gryffindor, he would have fitted into all houses, and there are many, I would even say more famous wizards in other houses. Many of the prominent figures in the ministry and even most ministers were, for example, in Hufflepuff. While Ravenclaw had many inventors in it. For example, the Floo powder network was invented by a Ravenclaw, and our head of house was even an unbeaten dueling champion. And Merlin himself was a Slytherin. So every house has its redeeming qualities and prominent figures, but the greatest disadvantage in Gryffindor for you is their students. They are rather loud and enjoy more trouble. It is rather hard to find a quiet place to study or read there, since most of them will rather want to do something else. But I am sure you will just find the place where you fit," finished Matthew. You are right, I will see where I land, since I don't even know where I will be sorted yet or how. Could you tell me?" she asked while trying to make puppy eyes. "Ha ha, sorry, no. This is a surprise for every new student and nobody will tell you. Well, I have to go now. Don't be a stranger no matter in which house you land. After all, we are friends now," replied Matthew as he began to leave. "Yes, we are friends. See you in Hogwarts," said Hermione with a beautiful and happy smile as she watched him leave, becoming Hermione's first real friend. Check, thought Matthew, as he left the store and headed for the exit of the alley. Chapter 51, Golden Trio 2. After Matthew returned home, he continued with his research on the soul inside the strange stone. He almost completed everything he wanted to this summer. There was only one event he had to visit the alley for once again. This specific event would ensure him a lot of political influence and support in the future. All he had to do was to invest a few hours. But that happened only in a few days, so Matthew had a lot of free time. All he could do was research at the moment, and the only thing of real research value at the moment was the stone. Through his experimentations, he managed to develop a spell that allows him to differentiate between humans, animals, and other souls. With this new data, he improved his sonar spell and added a soul search modification to the spell. This allowed him not only to see with the spell but also locate living things and identify what kind of living being it was. He even managed to differentiate between different animal species. Since he located a few in the garden and used them for his experiments. To complete the spell, he now only needed to scan different animals which he would add to his database so he could identify the specific animal in the future. But his main focus on this kind of research was to find a method to strengthen his soul, by absorbing or devouring other souls. Unfortunately, it wouldn't work with animal souls since they were too different from humans and had lots of energy particles in them that were incompatible with humans. The soul part in the stone should be compatible even though it wasn't human but it wasn't an animal either, but the soul was far more powerful than his own at the moment and would instead devour his. So his research on a soul-strengthening technique hit a wall that could be only overcome through better research subjects. But he couldn't just go and kidnap innocent people and experiment on them, he wasn't a psychopath. So he would have at least waited a year before he could continue with these experiments, since then he would be able to gain a research object. So in the end he decided to focus his research on other topics related to souls, like how to control them or to better understand them. And so the next few days would pass. Scene break. Wednesday, the 31st of July, 1991. Today was the day Matthew would visit Diagon Alley again, to place himself in Harry's good graces. Harry had his 11th birthday today and was visited by Hagrid at midnight in the lighthouse where Harry and the Dursleys fled from the Hogwarts letters. He had already learned of his wizarding heritage and the truth about the death of his parents by now. It was already late morning. Hagrid and Harry started early in the morning and would need around 4 hours from the hut on the rock to Diagon Alley in London. So they should arrive around lunch and would first visit Gringotts. After preparing himself and a nice breakfast, Matthew opened once again a portal and travelled with 2 jumps to the back alley of the Leaky Cauldron. He arrived around lunchtime in the alley. His best chance to meet Hagrid and Harry and get a quick scan on the Philosopher's Stone at the same time would be if he randomly met them in Gringotts. To not miss them, he entered a store close to the entrance of the Leaky Cauldron and waited there pretending to browse the goods while keeping an eye on the entrance. Matthew hadn't to wait long. After a few minutes the entrance from the cauldron formed into an archway, and the beardy figure of Hagrid, who was twice as large as a normal, stepped through it while saying something to a person behind him with an excited smile. He probably said welcome to Diagon Alley. Since this was one of the iconic scenes from the books and the movies, Matthew remembered it very well. Behind Hagrid followed the small dark-haired figure of Harry, who watched everything with an awed face. After Harry watched the entrance close again, they walked further into the alley in direction of Gringotts. Matthew trailed slowly with a bit distance behind them. As they entered the white marble building of Britain's only wizarding bank, he decided to wait a few minutes before he followed them into the bank, since he wanted to only meet them when they left the bank. As Matthew entered the bank, he approached leisurely the usual counter for withdrawal and slowly handled his business. He earned another 300 galleons since he withdrew some money last weekend for his Hogwarts shopping. As he finished his business and was about to leave, he spotted the large figure of Hagrid, who looked pale, because of the wild cart ride, who was followed by Harry. Matthew approached them. "Hello, Hagrid, nice to see you. Are you okay? You look somewhat pale." He greeted them as he mentally requested Sarah use every available scanning tool we have and scan the objects inside Hagrid's mantle. Unfortunately, he couldn't touch the stone since Hagrid would absolutely forbid it, and that would alarm Dumbledore. So he had to use only the simple energy and radiation scanners of the AI chip, but that would give him some data to work with and plan his further steps. Task confirmed. Beginning scan. Multiple objects found. Beginning detailed scan. Estimated finishing time, 3 minutes 19 seconds. The host needs to stay in scanning range. No problem, thought Matthew as he waited for Hagrid to reply. "Oh, Matthew, nice to see ye outside Hogwarts. I'm a bit unwell because of these damn carts," replied Hagrid a bit sickly, while turning to Harry. "Harry, this is Matthew Mason. He is a Ravenclaw student at Hogwarts." "Matthew, this is Har," began Hagrid to introduce them as Matthew interrupted him. "Harry Potter. I know. Nice to see you. I told you, Harry, we would see each other soon again," said Matthew as he grinned at the younger boy. "The boy from the zoo." "You are a wizard," replied a bit shocked Harry. "Yup. Just like you," answered Matthew with a grin. "You know each other?" asked an exhausted Hagrid who stared down at the two boys. "Yes, we met each other this year in the zoo in London. Harry here performed a nice feat of accidental magic and freed a boa constrictor who scared his cousin. The boy deserved it," retold Matthew as he explained their first meeting. Suddenly he heard Sarah's mechanical voice in his mind. Beep. Scan complete. Uploading gathered and analyzed data. That's interesting, thought Matthew as he comprehended the new data until he got his thoughts interrupted by Hagrid's reply. "Well, that was probably well deserved. The Dursley is a horrible bunch of people," said the exhausted Hagrid while smiling at Harry, who nodded a bit shyly. "Hagrid, how about you go to the cauldron and rest a bit and I help Harry with his shopping? You seem to be a bit exhausted from the cart ride. How about we meet in 2.5 hours outside Ollivander's?" suggested Matthew with a nice smile. "It would be nice if you could do that for me. And Harry would learn a bit from another student," replied Hagrid as we left the bank. After confirming that Harry was fine with it, he left for the cauldron and Harry and Matthew remained behind. Chapter 52, Golden Trio 3. "So Harry, what do you think of the wizarding world? How is your first impression?" began Matthew as he guided the younger boy further into the alley. "It's all so fascinating. I would have never believed that magic is real. I felt my whole life like something was missing and now it's there. But at the same time, I am a bit scared about the expectations people have of me. After all, I am just Harry, not some amazing Dark Lord killing hero. The other students will probably have far more knowledge of magic than me. After all, I never knew of magic until today," replied Harry while blurting his whole bandwidth of emotions out. "Ha ha, don't worry, just Harry," joked Matthew. "I like you grew up in the non-magical world, in the muggle world like wizards call it. And you won't be behind the students who grew up in the magical world. They grew up with magic. For them magic is something like radios, cars or a stove is for us. Magic is so normal for them that they don't have the fascination we possess. The students you could be behind are rather the ones like me, the smart book-loving ones. They will absorb every piece of this new kind of force in their lives. As for you being just Harry, don't worry too much. Although you will have to live with their stares and odd expressions, you will find also true friends who will give you a new home, and learn who you truly are." "You are probably right," replied Harry, visibly relaxed as we arrived at Madame Mackin's Robes for All Occasions. "That's our first stop, Harry. You can buy your robes here. I would recommend you to buy yourself some free time clothes. Your relatives seem to be disgusting humans, to only give you hand-downs. Just keep them in your trunk while you stay with them and they wouldn't know. Your parents probably left you enough money for this kind of stuff. I will get you a trunk while you are there. Let's meet here again when we are finished," explained Matthew while smiling. After Harry entered the store, Matthew headed to the trunk store where he bought his trunk and got for him a regular trunk with expanded inside, anti-theft, and shrinking enchantments. 20 minutes late he arrived again at Madame Mackin's Robes for All Occasions, where he waited for a few minutes until Harry also came out. "Got your clothes? Good. Here, this is a trunk with expanded insides and some safety measures. There is also an enchantment on it that lets it change its size on command. See that way. Put your clothes inside and we head for our next stop. Explained to Matthew as he shows Harry how the trunk works and store his new clothes inside. They continued in direction of Slugs and Jigger's apothecary, but suddenly Harry had a strange question. Are there different kinds of wizards? Asked the boy. So he still met Draco. Seems he will land in Gryffindor. Mused Matthew while he decided on how to reply. There are a certain group of wizards who have this kind of view, that these so-called pure-blood wizards are better than wizards and witches like me or your mother born from non-magical parents are, well, lesser than dirt to them. They even have a slur for it. They call us mudbloods. Unfortunately, they have a lot of political influence and ingrained these views into the common life in the wizarding worlds. Many of the purebloods' families were followers of Voldemort and managed to buy themselves free by pleading they were controlled through a spell. You probably met someone from a pureblood family since only them would talk about this kind of stuff while meeting someone. Explained Matthew. So that's how it was. Wait, you just said Voldemort's name. Aren't you scared? Asked Harry as he realized it. From what? Like you, I grew up in the non-magical world and don't have that fear ingrained in me. They didn't say his name back then because Voldemort cast a taboo on his name and was able to locate people who would say his name. Usually, after saying his name, a group of Death Eater would arrive and attack you. Death Eater is how his followers are called. Replied Matthew, half amused and half serious. They arrived at the apothecary where Harry bought his school ingredients. Matthew's discount made his shopping much cheaper. Next, they headed for Flourish and Blots where they would buy Harry's school books. Matthew also picked up a collection of books as he did for Hermione that would introduce the wizarding world's customs and common sense to Harry. He also picked additionally some books that would give Harry a good foundation for the school topics, especially potions. You should read these books and your school books before the lessons begin. So you are prepared. Although it's not required, it will help you. Especially in potions. The potion teacher is famous for picking on students who don't belong in his house Slytherin. And often quizzes new students to scare them. He is actually a good guy, but he needs to keep up a facade that he is partial to them because of politics. Explained Matthew as they left the bookstore. House Slytherin. What's that about? Wondered Harry while staring at Matthew. Hogwarts has 4 houses that students get sorted into based on their character. They are Hufflepuff, Gryffindor, Slytherin, and the house I am in, Ravenclaw. Slytherin is a rather complex house because of politics. It's the house where Voldemort and most of his followers were in. I wouldn't go there if I were you, since many of their children are there now, although some of them are also decent and got sorted there because it fits their character. Answered Matthew dutifully. How do I get sorted? Asked Harry. That's a surprise. Don't worry where you get sorted, every house has its advantage. Replied Matthew while comforting the younger boy who got a bit worried again. Afterward, they had a bit of time and Matthew invited Harry to a nice break at Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. As they finished their ice cream, they headed for Ollivander's wand store. So this is the last thing on your list and probably the most important one. Your wand. You should go yourself in since it is a rather important and personal choice. You will probably also learn something about your parents there since Mr. Ollivander remembers every wand he ever sold. Oh, and buy a wand holster, since a wand could, like a gun, accidentally fire off if you are not careful. A holster will prevent that. Explained Matthew as he sent the boy into the old store which existed since 382 BC. He waited here for a while and wondered whether would Hagrid or Harry would arrive first, since it was slowly time for their meeting. After a while, Harry once again left the store and arrived outside. "So do you have your wand, Harry? Good. Oh, it seems Hagrid also arrived," exclaimed Matthew as he spotted the half-giant. "Harry, I will leave you here. We will meet each other on the train. If not, then latest in Hogwarts. Keep your trunk shrunken with you so your relatives can't do anything to your stuff," said Matthew as he was about to leave. "Yes, see you in Hogwarts. And thank you for your help," replied the younger boy happily. Chapter 53, End of Holidays. As Matthew arrived at home, he once again checked out the data he gathered on the Philosopher's Stone. According to Sarah's scan, the stone was a large concentration of crystallized energy. Specifically, life force, a form of energy inherent to all living beings. This form of energy was often used in the dark arts. According to Sarah's analysis, the stone contained the life's force equal to multiple 100,000 living beings. No wonder this stone was able to create something like an elixir of life. It was pure life force after all. This wasn't purely alchemy, this was also a large part of blood magic. Instead of transmuting only metal into gold, it sacrifices life force to create the necessary particles that every metal was missing. But how did Nicholas Flamel create a crystallized stone of it? And where did he get all this life force from? After all, if he killed so many people, that would be known. Instead of a famous immortal alchemist, he would be known as one of the most terrifying Dark Lords in history. How did he do it, wondered Matthew as he comprehended the true meaning of the data. Wait. Nicholas Flamel was born approximately in 1327. Between 1346 and 1353, that's when the Black Death killed over 25 million people in Europe. He was around 20 years old and just out of school. As a talented wizard, it wasn't hard to create a ritual to create the stone by sacrificing lives. A few 100,000 more death wouldn't matter among millions of death during the Black Death pandemic, and nobody would even question it if sewn right by Merlin's saggy balls. Nicholas Flamel was just a Dark Lord that succeeded with his aspiration without anybody knowing the truth. Until now. Probably only I know the truth, but Dumbledore maybe too. That's why he was so happy to let the Flamels die. Now everything makes sense, concluded Matthew as he realized the truth about the immortal alchemist. So I will have to change my plans. I don't need to save another Dark Lord. Originally I wanted to become his student and gain access to his century-old collection of books by secretly saving the stone and returning it to him. Complained Matthew mentally, well, I still can locate his books after he dies. And his largest secret is such a simple solution to immortality that just makes him disappointing. He probably picked up some useful knowledge over the centuries, but it's not worth it. I could create such a ritual myself, but everyone would label me a Dark Lord, and I don't want to rely on the elixir of life, mused Matthew. Well, I should still probably steal the stone. After all, why waste so many lives? If nobody wants it, I can take it. It's still a useful magical object. And creating a realistic decoy should be simple. After all, it's contained life force inside a crystallized stone made of the blood of thousands of people. But once it's destroyed, the life force would disperse and everything that remains is crystallized blood splitters. Decided Matthew as he planned his future, I will just have to preserve the timeline, so I have to steal it after Christmas, and I still need to create a method to bypass the mirror. After Matthew finished his plans, he joined his parents to dinner and spent the rest of the day with them. since he would be still busy the next month before he returns to Hogwarts. Scene break. The next few weeks were a busy time for Matthew. He spent a lot of time inside his room where he created in one corner a permanent laboratory. With the help of transfiguration he transformed some wood he picked up after visiting his father at work into a desk, a potion preparation station, and some drawers where he would keep his notes. Afterward, he created a fireplace for 4 different cauldrons, so he could work on multiple things similarly. He couldn't create more since even though his room was large, it still was limited. He still wasn't able to expand his room with magic. This was a rather complex branch of magic that fell into the category of space magic, and unfortunately not available in the Hogwarts library. There was an expansion charm, but it only worked on smaller objects like trunks, and a room would collapse in itself. This kind of magic was unfortunately family magic, that people kept to themselves. He could figure out how it worked, but it would cost him at least a few months. There was no point to it currently since the space he had at the moment was enough. But he should get one of the house trunks, like Newt Scamander had one, in the future. Analyzing one would probably cut down the time he needed massively since they were different from expansion charms and most likely the magic he needed, but they were expensive as hell. It would most likely cost him his whole vault, so he chose to wait a bit and rather save his money for now. After he completed his laboratory he began with his research, while he still continued with his experiments on souls and the strange stone. They became a side project for now. The first main objective during the rest of his holidays was to create and fake Philosopher's Stone, which was only distinguishable if you understand the real stone and how it was made or actually wanted to use it. Once it was destroyed nobody would be able to tell the difference. For that, he definitely needed one ingredient that was a bit troublesome to get: human blood. Yes, he could use his own but he didn't want to. And it would be more realistic if he could get multiple different blood samples of different people. Since the original was also created from the blood of thousands of different people. Luckily this was something he should be able to buy in Nocturne Alley. This was after all something vampires needed, which were some of the residents of the Shady Alley. After a short trip to the alley, he was able to acquire different kinds of blood samples. He visited multiple different stores to acquire a wide range of different blood, amongst them the apothecary he visited previously. The next few weeks were spent with trying different methods to create a possibly realistic stone. One of the materials he added was pure iron since iron was contained in blood. With it he was able to lower his need for blood and substitute it with it. He also added some salt and sand to create the crystallization. Afterward for the final stone he only needed to purify some magical ingredients so he would get the magical radiation from it. In the end, he was able to create a realistic stone with the help of Sarah. With that his main goal was complete, but he still had a few days before the next year in Hogwarts began. The rest of the holidays he began to research the remaining magical essence he had. After all, finding a method to strengthen himself was always needed even though he had just recently completed a magical maturation. Unfortunately, his Azure Corn potion lost its effect, it was simply too weak. And the low-grade magical essence was too weak to create a more potent potion. But all his experiments failed, and in a few days, he found no real solution. But in the end, he still had time since he just broke through and had a lot of space to grow. He was after all far superior to anyone his age, and before Voldemort returned he had enough time to reach a level of strength that guarantees his survival. Chapter 54, A New School Year. Sunday, the 1st of September, 1991. Matthew and his parents arrived at 10:30 at King's Cross railway station. Just as they parked their car and entered the station, he spotted the three Dursley leaving the station while laughing disgustingly. "Well, it seems Harry is already here," mused Matthew as he watched them drive away. They entered the station and walked towards platform 9 and 10, where he spotted Harry approaching a group of familiar redheads while looking somewhat nervous. Matthew quickly said goodbye to his parents and also approached the group just as Fred passed through the barrier. As he came in range, he only saw Harry pass through the barrier between platform 9 and 10. I was a bit too slow. Well, I will meet him in Hogwarts at the latest, but probably in the train," thought Matthew as he greeted the rest of the Weasleys. Afterward, he also passed through the barrier and entered platform 9¾ where the red Hogwarts Express was already waiting. As he walked down the platform towards the end of the train to look for an empty compartment, he spotted Harry as he tried to lift his trunk up the steps but could hardly raise one end, and twice he dropped it painfully on his foot. Why didn't he shrink it? He must have forgotten it, wondered Matthew as he approached him. Just at that moment, he saw George speak to him. "Want a hand?" he heard him ask. "Hello Harry." "Hi George. How are you?" greeted Matthew as he arrived beside them. "Oi Matthew, had nice holidays? Come, let's give him a hand with his trunk," said George just as he realized that Matthew called the other person Harry. "Wait Harry!" exclaimed George as his eyes wandered to Harry's forehead where his lightning scar was located. "Blimey, you are Harry Potter." Yes. Nice to meet you." "Hello Matthew," said Harry, a bit embarrassed. "Why didn't you shrink and lighten your trunk?" asked Matthew. Harry suddenly had an embarrassed, sheepish look on his face. I forgot it." As he pulled his wand out and tapped the top side of his trunk as he shrunk down, he put it into his pocket. "George, you should go say your mom goodbye, you will have enough time to meet Harry in Hogwarts," said Matthew, "and Harry, you should look for other students of your year so you get to meet them." George joined Fred and they left to say goodbye to their mother while telling her that they just met Harry Potter as Harry entered the Hogwarts Express and chose an empty compartment. After leaving Harry in his compartment where he would meet Ron later, Matthew looked for his friends and found them in a compartment close by. They talked about their holidays while waiting for the train to start. At point 11 the Hogwarts Express began to move and left the King's Cross railway station in direction of Hogsmeade, which was somewhere in the north, in the Scottish Highlands. The train ride was pretty quiet. A bit later he saw three boys pass his compartment in direction of Harry's. Two of them looked like small trolls and the middle one had a pale complexion and platinum blonde hair. "Well, Harry definitely won't land in Slytherin," concluded Matthew as he watched Draco Malfoy and his lackeys pass his compartment with amusement. As they came closer and closer to Hogwarts, their compartment door opened and a familiar brown-haired girl stood in the entrance with a shy dark-haired boy behind her. "Excuse me, has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one," she asked with a bossy tone as she watched the people in the compartment until her eyes stopped at Matthew. "Hello, Hermione, nice to see you. But usually, you knock before entering a compartment," greeted an amused Matthew. Hello Matthew. Sorry, I didn't mean to be impolite," replied a suddenly embarrassed Hermione. "About that toad. What's his name?" asked Matthew while he looked at Neville. His name is Trevor," answered Neville. "Let's see. Give me one moment," muttered Matthew as he stepped into the corridor. "Achio Trevor. he cast with his wand that appeared suddenly in his hand from his wand holster strapped to his wrist. He stretched his hand out, and a minute later a green toad flew directly into it from one end of the train. "Here, that seems to be Trevor," said Matthew with a smile as he handed the toad to Neville. "And the next time you have such a problem, you should visit the perfect compartment in front of the train. They should be able to help you with small problems like this." "What kind of spell was that? In which book do I find it?" asked and exited Hermione as she entered the compartment and sat beside Matthew. "It's the summoning charm, Accio. You will learn it in your 4th year usually. You can find the spell in the Standard Book of Spells Grade 4. Explained Matthew patiently, as he and his friends gained new people to their compartment. Soon they arrived at Hogwarts, where Hermione and Neville left the group and joined Hagrid and the other first-year students. Matthew and his friends took the Thestral carriages and arrived at the ancient castle. Inside the Great Hall, they sat down at the Ravenclaw table and greeted the other students. While they were waiting for the feast to start, he chatted with Jo about their holiday. He takes a quick look at the teachers meanwhile. On the high table the teachers were already there. This year Kirill sat in the position of the teacher. He now had a turban on his head, unlike before he left for his sabbatical, which just meant that he was possessed by Voldemort. Matthew didn't look at him anymore since he didn't want to gain his attention. The rest of the teachers remained the same as last year. After a while, Professor McGonagall stood up and left the Great Hall to get the first-year students, who should have arrived with the boats. Soon she entered the hall once again and checked if everything was ready. After she left the hall once again, she entered a few seconds later with the first-year students. Matthew was able to recognize many of them based on the description from the books, like Susan Bones, Hannah Abbott, Tracy Davies, Daphne Greengrass, Blaise Zabini, Seamus Finnegan, and many more. 40 first-year students in total entered the Great Hall through the big entrance. He heard how Hermione whispered about the enchanted ceiling. It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history, which made him smile since this was so Hermione-like. As the new students arrived at the high table, Professor McGonagall got the four-legged stool and put the sorting hat on it. The hat began to move and began to welcome the students with his song for this year. After he finished, he watched Ron as he looked visibly more at ease now, since he didn't need to fight a troll. Professor McGonagall stepped forward while holding a long roll of parchment and opened the sorting. "When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted," she explained and began with the first names. Chapter 55, Sorting Feast. Professor McGonagall started with the sorting, Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones to Hufflepuff, Terry Boot to Ravenclaw, and so on, pretty much like in the Harry Potter books. "Granger, Hermione," she called now while reading from her list. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Her sorting took a while. Matthew was pretty sure in the original her sorting didn't take so long. Could it be, wondered Matthew as he watched the girl and the hat until suddenly the hat opened its mouth. "Ravenclaw!" it shouted out. And Hermione ran down the stairs and joined the Ravenclaw table while smiling at Matthew and waving at him. Matthew waved with a nice smile back. "Oh shit. Keeping the canon timeline intact, my ass. I should have kept my distance," blamed Matthew himself. Well, how should Ron and Harry even survive their school years? Harry will either drop from his broom or get strangled by the devil snare protecting the Philosopher's Stone. Now I will have to take a more active role. Maybe Hermione can still become friends with them, wondered Matthew as he began to plan what he should do now. While he was in his thoughts, the sorting continued. Neville landed in Gryffindor but forgot to take off the sorting hat as he ran off to the table. He had to return and put the hat back on the chair under the laughter of the other students. Malfoy landed in Slytherin before the sorting hat was even completely touched his head. The sorting continued like in canon. Potter, Harry. Read Professor McGonagall out loudly from her scroll. The hall became instantly quiet and whisper broke out like hissing fire all over the hall. Potter, did she say? Asked a voice. Another one asked, the Harry Potter. Harry walked forward and placed himself on the chair as the whole hall tried to get a good look at him, and Professor McGonagall put the sorting hat on his head. Where do you guys think he will be sorted? Asked Roger as he stared at the dark-haired boy with the hat on his head. Gryffindor, commented Matthew nonchalantly. I met him in Diagon Alley, and he has the disposition of a Gryffindor, and both his parents were in the house. Maybe Ravenclaw, but doubtful. Although he is smart, he isn't interested in studies. Explained Matthew to his friends. Although maybe he will put more effort in than in canon. At the same time Hermione is missing, so his grades will probably drop, but at the same time he also may become better since he has to rely more on himself. Will Ron even graduate? Pondered Matthew as he realized that possibility while his friends continued the discussion. Suddenly the hat shouted, better be Gryffindor. Harry took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. He looked relieved, as the whole Gryffindor table broke out in cheers, the loudest cheers in the whole sorting. Percy got even up and shook Harry's hands vigorously. What an ass-kisser, no wonder he becomes the personal secretary of the minister later on. The twins yelled, we got Potter. We got Potter. As Harry sat down opposite of Nicholas de Mimsy-Porpington, or short Sir Nicholas, the ghost of House Gryffindor, also known as the near-headless Nick, who patted Harry on his arm. Even the people on the teacher table paid special attention to Harry now. Hagrid gave Harry a thumbs up while Dumbledore even raised his cup for him. Well, Slytherin will this year not win the House Cup, since Dumbledore would give his golden boy preferential treatment this year. But maybe Ravenclaw also had a chance to win if Matthew and Hermione would be able to contribute to the whole stone drama. The sorting continued as only 4 students were remaining. Dean Thomas, a black boy even taller than Ron, landed in Gryffindor, and Lisa Turpin, a dark-haired girl with glasses, joined the Ravenclaw table. Then it was Ron's turn, who like all Weasleys landed in Gryffindor. The loudest cheered his brothers and Harry for him. Last but not least, Blaise Zabini, a dark-skinned boy, landed in Slytherin. He was the son of the famous Black Widow, who had already 6 different husbands at this point in time. Matthew wondered how she actually looked. Fun fact: as Matthew read the first Harry Potter book in his last life, Blaise Zabini was translated as a girl in his mother language since his gender wasn't clear in the first book. Now that the sorting was complete, Professor McGonagall put her scroll and the sorting hat away. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms opened wide as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. Welcome, he said. Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are: Nitwit, Blubber, Oddment, Tweak. Thank you. He sat back down and waved his hands as the food appeared on the tables. Everybody clapped and cheered. Is getting Dumbledore mad? Asked Cho besides him. No. Dumbledore wants to point out a rather troublesome problem between the 4 houses. These 4 words may sound mad but have a deep meaning. Hey are other, another word for other. Dumbledore points out the division between the houses. Began Matthew to explain. Ravenclaw is a house of intellect and would see the members of other houses as nitwits sometime. Gryffindor is a rather athletic house, while blubber is another word for fat used on British playgrounds. The members of House Slytherin love pure blood, and for them is another an oddment, which means in the world of sewing cloth remains. While for Hufflepuff their unity is very important to them, while the members of the other houses would need to be tweaked to fit in. So tweak is other for Hufflepuffs. Rather than mad, Dumbledore is brilliant, explained Matthew to his group of friends, while the rest of the table also listened in wonder. It was visible how the respect for Dumbledore grew on the whole table, and some of the students even fell in thought while comprehending the deeper meaning of the words. The feast continued while Matthew paid attention to the Gryffindor table. Harry watched the head table. As he stared at Snape and Quirrell, his hand suddenly clapped at his head and he asked Percy something. "So that confirms it. Voldemort is here," concluded Matthew. As everyone finished and the food on the tables vanished, Dumbledore got to his feet again. "Ahem, just a few more words now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start of term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils. And a few of our older students would do well to remember that as well." Dumbledore's twinkling eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins and then at Matthew. "Oh, shit, wasn't as sneaky as I thought. Damn right, the wards monitor the location of every student. Although he wouldn't be able to know where every student is 24/7, he would know if someone leaves the wards. Hopefully, he didn't follow me," thought Matthew. "I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death." With that, the feast come to its conclusion. After the school song, the students left the Great Hall. The first-year students followed the prefects to their respective common rooms. Matthew and his friends left for the Ravenclaw common room and retired for the night. Chapter 56, Updating the Minimap. Monday, the 2nd of September, 1991. After his morning workout that Matthew kept up to keep his body in top condition, he headed to the Great Hall for breakfast, where he also acquired the new schedule for his third year. This year he had 2 additional classes on his plan which would take more of his time. At least he wasn't so insane to take all classes just to acquire a time tuner to study. He hoped that Hermione would get one in her third year and he would then have the opportunity to study it. After all, he wasn't ready to study time at the moment, he had enough on his plate. Today he only had History of Magic, where he spent his time reading the new books from the library that arrived this year, since Mrs. Pince would add new books to the Hogwarts library every year to keep it updated. After all, Hogwarts was one of the biggest and oldest magical libraries in the world. Since Matthew needed something to do in History of Magic, he didn't scan them directly, since they, either way, would only add a small amount of new knowledge to his extensive database. Besides History of Magic, he also had Defense Against the Dark Arts, with the annoyingly stuttering Quirrell Mort. To not get unwanted attention from him, Matthew had no other choice than to endure this completely boring and useless class while pretending to take notes from Quirrell Mort's incomprehensible stutters. Mondays would be the most troublesome days this year, since he had the most useless classes on them this year. Once his classes were finished, he excused himself from his friends and headed for one of the unused classrooms. He couldn't risk entering the room of requirement this year with the high risk of Kirill Mort discovering him. Since Matthew wasn't sure how much attention Voldemort would pay to the room where his Horcrux was hidden. Kirill was just a disposable pawn for him, so he would most likely check out if the Horcrux was safe since dead men tell no tales. And Kirill would, because of the possession through Voldemort and the unicorn blood they would consume later to keep the body intact, die either way. Matthew didn't want to lose the advantage of the room of requirements this year completely. So he needed a way to monitor the location of Kirill Mort 24/7. There were multiple examples of people who accomplished that in Hogwarts, like Dumbledore or any other headmaster and the Marauders. They all used the same method. Matthew figured out how they did it already before he completed reading the Hogwarts library, since the method was obvious. He just didn't have a use for his own Marauders map, since he would have to invest a lot of time to create one with an incomplete database. But now that his database was so extensive, it was pretty simple. The magic they used was simply the Hogwarts wards, which monitored the insides of the castle and the safety of the students. Every headmaster was connected to these 1,000-year-old wards, which only became more powerful over the ages. This was just one of the perks and requirements for being a headmaster, and was clearly recorded in older versions of Hogwarts, a history which he acquired through the Room of Requirements in the past. Probably because of the recent Wizarding War and global Dark Lords like Grindelwald, this information was removed for safety measurements. This was also the proof that Dumbledore planned Voldemort's death, probably since he got the confirmation of the existence of his Horcruxes in Harry's second year through the diary. Dumbledore knew that Barty Crouch Jr. was pretending as Mad-Eye Moody, but needed Voldemort to return with Harry's blood so the young boy got a chance for survival. That's also why Matthew needed to keep the canon timeline mostly intact until Voldemort's returned. Once he resurrected himself with Harry's blood, he was as good as dead. The Marauders, on the other hand, were quite the brilliant students to figure it out. Although it wasn't hard to connect to the wards once you are inside them, figuring out how they worked and what they did was a genius move. The rest of the map was simply a visual representation of the information shared by the wards, with a few concealment charms and enchantments that would also insult someone who tried to access it forcibly. But nothing useful to take a closer look at, so he didn't steal it like an idiot for anything substantial to gain. Weeks ago, Matthew created, with the help of Sarah's calculation, a spell to connect himself to the Hogwarts wards without Dumbledore or any headmaster who was controlling the wards being aware of it. All he needed for it was to be inside of them. Since Dumbledore was most likely aware of the Marauders map and could cancel the connection any time, which Matthew didn't want to. Although he had nothing against Dumbledore, the less control and information the old schemer had over him, the better. Unfortunately, Matthew wouldn't be able to gain control over the wards, only their information. To gain control over wards, a wizard needed to be keyed into the wardstone, which was located in the headmaster office, the safest place in the castle. On one of his explorations of the castle, Matthew found out that the office had another extra set of wards just to protect the office. This means there should be 2 wardstones there, and the office was impossible to break in without the knowledge of the headmaster. After a few minutes, Matthew was able to establish the connection with the wards with his spell. Sarah used the data acquired through the Hogwarts wards and update my minimap with it. Create a new subroutine for it and stop the echolocation subroutine inside the castle, since it would be redundant now. Beep. Confirming task. Connection established and subroutine created. Updating map. Task complete, minimap updated. Suddenly the minimap inside Matthew's mind changed and he gained a ton of new information on it. He knew a lot of secret corridors and rooms inside the castle already, but a ton of new ones appeared thanks to the connection. The room of requirements wasn't there, which meant that the headmaster was unaware of it and couldn't monitor it, and since it was inside the wards nobody left them and he wouldn't be alarmed. Thanks to the AI chip, Matthew had now a minimap of Hogwarts which allowed him to monitor the location of every person in the castle 24/7. Something a normal wizard couldn't do, although they were more powerful than normal humans. In the end, they were still base human and couldn't split their awareness. So Dumbledore wasn't able to permanently monitor the castle like Matthew could with Sarah's assistance. Now that he had his minimap, he was able to be always aware of Quirrell Mort's location and could dodge him permanently. Matthew could now use the room of requirements without trouble. If Quirrell Mort was headed there or came close, Sarah would alarm him and all he had to do was open a portal and head for a remote classroom. Matthew was now basically uncatchable inside Hogwarts for anybody besides the headmaster, who could also apparate inside Hogwarts or use Phoenix travel. Lucky for Matthew was also that Voldemort was too arrogant to create something like a Marauder's map to monitor the castle. Without a doubt, he was capable of it, but probably already too mad thanks to his split soul. For the rest of the day, Matthew practiced a few more complex spells since he now had the reserves of a fifth-year student and was able to do it without a strain on himself. After all, the regular practice would allow his reserves to grow faster, and the bigger the spell the more magic he used. Once curfew approached, he returned to the Ravenclaw Tower and rested for the day. Chapter 57, Ancient Runes. Tuesday, the 3rd of September, 1991. Matthew woke up quite excited today since he would have for the first time one of his electives, Ancient Runes. He already prepared a few questions for Professor Bathsheba babbling their Ancient Runes lecture. But first, he would have a nice double lesson of charms with Professor Flitwick and a bit of herbology in between. After breakfast, they headed for Classroom 2E, which was located in the Charms corridor on the 3rd floor close to the Training Grounds Tower. Coincidentally, Matthew and his friends had to pass the Forbidden Corridor where the Philosopher's Stone was guarded or will be guarded in the future. Since Matthew wasn't sure if the stone was already there at this point, since the Mirror of Erist only gets moved there after the Christmas break. He didn't believe the stone would just lay there in the last room on the ground, only guarded by traps that even first-year students could pass. While passing the Forbidden Corridor, Matthew quickly cast a Hominum Revelio in the direction of the door wandless so his friends wouldn't notice it. The reading he got from the spell told him that Fluffy, the Cerberus with the worst name for a deadly three-headed dog who supposedly guards the entrance to hell or the underworld in Greek mythology, was already guarding the trapdoor. After a few moments, he realized that he just could have used his minimap to confirm that, which also showed that Fluffy was located in the room. He was the only living thing inside the 7 rooms, which was strange since there should be also a troll guarding one of the rooms. They probably still didn't put it there. Or rather Quirrell, since this was his contribution to protect the stone. They arrived at their charms class, which soon started. During the first lesson they had a bit of revision of the last year's. They repeated spells like the levitation charm. After making sure that everyone still could cast the spells, the small professor began with the new spells for their 3rd year. The first spell they would learn this year was the cheering charm. According to Flitwick, the charm was created by Felix Summerby in the mid-1500s and created a feeling of great contentment. If he remembered right, this was one of the charms which would appear at the end of the year exams, which was logical since they were easy to practice and harmless. This gave Matthew an idea for a future project which could earn him massive amounts of money in the non-magical world. Wasn't this basically what some drugs did, just that this didn't harm the consumer's health? He definitely should create a potion with a similar effect and fill it into pills that he would sell. Happiness was something many people would want, but this idea had to wait until he was of legal age or at least close by and powerful enough to give a shit about ministries, since they would most likely try to restrict him. As charms finished, they had an hour of herbology before lunch. Nothing special happened in class. They only started with puffapods, a magical plant that produced large pink seed pods full of shining beans, which instantly flowered when they came into contact with any solid object. The spores of a puffapod could cause dizziness and could also be used in potion making. Trolls appeared to be allergic to puffapods, sneezing whenever they bloom. Matthew stored a few seeds of it instantly in his pocket. Once they finished with their lunch break, it was finally time for Ancient Runes, the lesson Matthew anticipated the most today. Runes class was in classroom 6am, which was on the 6th floor. The class wasn't so full as the other classes, so members of all 4 houses shared this class. Still, most of the Ravenclaws took this class, which wasn't strange since they always are studious. Matthew and his friends took 2 desks in the front of the class so they wouldn't miss it. All of his friends took runes, but unfortunately, instead of arithmancy, they rather took care of magical creatures with Professor Kettleburn. After a while, Professor Bathsheba Babbling entered the classroom and the students became quiet. Bathsheba Babbling was an average-height woman that was fair-skinned. She has brown hair and eyes. Bathsheba looked as she was getting on in age, as she had some wrinkles on her face that could vanish with a simple potion and no one would know it was ever there. Take your seats. My name is Bathsheba Babbling and I will be teaching you about ancient runes and some common runes used today. She started the class. In ancient times, runes were the main method to cast spells. Later on, it was replaced by charms, a method that worked with less preparation. Ancient wizards had different methods to cast spells with the help of runes. Some enchanted artifacts with spells, some tattooed rune clusters onto their skin to channel magic through it for specific spells. Then some wizards used disposable objects like rune stones here in Britain or Nordic countries, while in Asia they used paper talismans, which some spellcaster even use until today. After runes got replaced by charms, their main application shifted to enchanting and warding. You find today runes usually on ward stones. This is what is professionally called a centralized ward schemes. Some powerful ancient ward schemes are distributed over large areas. Hogwarts wards are a mix of both, which is also possible. She explained. Another usage would be small rune clusters for specific usage. Many wizarding communities use, for example, runic lights and similar applications. The advantage of runes in enchanting and warding is that they are physically anchored into the enchanted object and last longer. This would be also possible with enchanting through charms, but it takes a lot more energy. You see, there are many different methods of how runes could be used even today. Does anyone have a question? She finished her introduction into the topic of ancient runes. Matthew instantly raised his hand. Yes, dear, could you introduce yourself first? Requested the professor as she pointed at Matthew. My name is Matthew Mason. I have a question regarding the different rune languages. After reading many different books on the topic of runes, I found that all major magical cultures had at least one set of runic languages over their history. Egypt had hieroglyphs. In Britain, France, and the Germanic countries where the different versions of Futhark spread, like Elder Futhark, Younger Futhark, or the medieval one which was still used during the founding of Hogwarts. Ancient Greece had their own runic system. In Asia they used older versions of the languages they use even today. In America, the Maya and Aztecs had their own writing culture, although the Aztecs rather used blood as a medium for their magic. Of all these past magical cultures I could find records of their language at least partially. Only about the ancient Norse runic system, I didn't find anything. Not even a letter. Why is that? Asked Matthew after a rather lengthy description. Ah, that is an interesting question, my boy. You won't find a definitive answer anywhere since all that remains are legends. According to them, the Norse gods themselves, after either a great war or a disaster caused by Norse magic use, removed all records about the runic language. This is the most detailed answer you will find anywhere. Has anybody else a question? Asked the professor after answering Matthew. While the class continued, Matthew stayed in his thoughts. There was probably some kind of disaster that wiped all records of the runic language out. And the legends then turned this into something that the Norse gods themselves removed the language. After all, there are no Norse gods or Asgard. Or are there? Asked Matthew himself as he had to think about the dark shadow that tried to invade his mind as he read the Scroll of Sins. Well, it isn't impossible. I shouldn't forget the possibility completely, but I have no proof or even a clue of their existence at the moment besides this legend, which could be interpreted differently. Mused Matthew as he continued to listen to the class. He would need to look for different sources of what really happened to the Norse runic language, since he would most likely find not much about it in Hogwarts since it happened long before it. Chapter 58, School Life. The first week continued without troubles for Matthew. Yes, Kirill's classes were annoying, but so was History of Magic, where a ghost would bore you to death. Potions with Snape was also a bit bad this year since he seemed to have always a bad mood, most likely because of Harry's presence. Arithmancy was a decent addition to Matthew's curriculum, but nothing extraordinary. If you knew maths from the non-magical, especially of higher years, which Matthew studied in advance since it would be useful for him, you would have no troubles with arithmancy. The class mainly focused on the magical properties of numbers, calculating the future, and numerology. So basically the basics. In their 6th year they would only begin with the necessary calculations for spell creations. Although Matthew gained a bit of valuable insight from Professor Septima Vector's experience, it was mainly a class to look good on his resume, if you would like to say so. He would have rather chosen another class, but there was not really a more useful alternative. Alchemy was only taught in the 6th and 7th years if there were enough interested and qualified students there. Dueling was completely removed from the curriculum for decades, and the rest possible choices just were not good enough to spend time in. Matthew would rather spend time in a subject where he could still gain at least small insights into useful topics than none or completely useless. After all, he had to choose at least 2 electives. With the AI chip, he would always have that problem no matter which school he attended. His learning speed was just impossible to keep up with. The scanning spell that instantly allows him to read books didn't help the matter. For him to significantly progress knowledge-wise, he would have to research himself or find rare books and information on topics he didn't have. The only places in Hogwarts that could possibly fulfill that, he wasn't sure since the canon was never specific on that or didn't mention it, were either the Room of Lost Things, which he, unfortunately, couldn't access until Voldemort left the castle, since he wasn't sure if the Horcrux could communicate with Voldemort if he was close, or the Chamber of Secrets. Although Matthew wasn't sure if the chamber contained a library or anything besides a deadly 1,000-year-old basilisk. He could probably access it now, but he did not want to fight the basilisk for now since he was only 30% sure of surviving the conflict. He was 90% he could kill the basilisk, but he was unsure if he would survive the fight himself. For a library, he was unsure it even existed or if he could read it, since it could be written in parcel according to some fanfictions Matthew read in his past life. the risk wasn't worth it for now. Matthew spent also some time again this year studying with Cho. This year they put their study sessions on Thursday after class, so Matthew would have the whole weekend available if he needed it. They got also joined by someone else, besides their friends who joined them if they needed it, Hermione to be precise, who hadn't the easiest time even in Ravenclaw thanks to her natural bossy tone and the need to prove herself. But Cho was pretty nice to her, and Matthew was already her first friend, so the beginning of her first year wasn't as bad in the original work. Scene break. The next week on Thursday evening a new rumor spread through Hogwarts. Harry Potter became the youngest Seeker in a century. During the first year flying lesson, Harry caught Neville's Remembrall with his natural talent on the broom. This whole spectacle was witnessed by Professor McGonagall, who instead of punishing him added him to the team. Which was supposed to be a secret, but nothing could stop the Hogwarts rumor mill. This was unimportant for Matthew, who currently used the Room of Requirements once again. After all, he could now always monitor Quirrell Mort's location. He was currently starting to practice silently casted magic. Now that he completed his first magical maturity, he reached the level of an O.W.L student. The minimal required level to cast magic silently effectively. Matthew began with his first-year spells. The energy consumption for silently casted magic tripled, at least additional to the higher consumption of his wandless casting. To master a spell silently he needed at least a few tries. After all, it was much harder with the limitations on his brain. At the same time, it did real wonders on his magical control. His control improved through leaps and bounds with this harder form of magic casting. Today he practiced magic until midnight, since there was something he wanted to confirm. Shortly before midnight, he used a disillusionment charm, silencing charm, and a self-created presence erasure charm that also removed his smell. He headed for the trophy room where Harry and Ron should arrive for their duel with Malfoy. The corridors were fitted with bars of moonlight from the high windows as Matthew arrived on the third floor where the trophy room was. The crystal trophy cases glimmered where the moonlight caught them. Cups, shields, plates, and statues winked silver and gold in the darkness. They edged along the walls as Matthew waited invisible for his targets to arrive. He hadn't to wait long as 3 small first-year students arrived in the room. This time Hermione wasn't present, it was only Harry, Ron, and Neville, who again probably forgot the password to their common room. "He's late, maybe he's chickened out," Ron whispered after they waited for a few minutes. A noise in the next room made the 3 first-year students jump. Filch and his disgusting cat arrived. "Sniff around, my sweet, they might be lurking in a corner," said Mr. Filch, who clearly got informed of their presence as he neared the trophy room. The 3 first years followed Harry out of the trophy room. In the gallery full of armors, Neville accidentally fell and toppled over a suit of armor. The noise was loud enough to wake up the castle. "Run!" yelled Harry as the 3 of them began to flee in direction of the forbidden corridor. "So I was right. Dumbledore doesn't want to only take out Nicholas Flamel, but also test Harry and confirm that Voldemort is alive, and most likely the connection between the two," mused Matthew as he followed behind the 3 first years. He could clearly feel the effect of a timed compulsion charm on them that drew them to the forbidden corridor. The final piece of proof Matthew needed was that the door this time wasn't even locked. As Peeves shouted that there were first years out of the bed, they quickly hid inside the room. Since Hermione wasn't here, nobody would be able to unlock the door for them. Matthew watched them hide inside the room where Fluffy was. Soon after, a pissed off Filch passed the corridor after Peeves tricked him. A few minutes later, the 3 Gryffindors fled out of the forbidden room from a 3-headed dog that tried to eat them. They quickly fled in direction of the 7th floor to get as much distance from the monstrous dog. Matthew made sure they arrived safely before he left for his own common room. The events of Canon all ran according to plan. He was unsure if he needed to interfere and give them a few hints since Hermione wasn't currently with them. But maybe Dumbledore the old schemer had already all planned out for them. While thinking of many possible plans and contingencies, Matthew fell slowly asleep as his eyes felt heavier and heavier. Chapter 59, Magic and More Spells. A week after the Golden Duo, maybe trio if Neville joins them, discovered the trapdoor behind Fluffy, another important event happened for Matthew. He finally mastered the 2nd level of his current occlumency training. It was time to apply the 3rd and final level on his brain. But that gave him another problem. Although he was always aware where Quirrell Mort was located and could react, but only if he could move. That was something he couldn't do while applying the spell since it required his whole concentration and he was restricted into a rune formation. Moving during the spell would most likely cause permanent harm to his brain, something he absolutely didn't need. Although the chances that Quirrell Mort would check out the Room of Requirements during his ritual was low, it wasn't impossible. So that was something Matthew didn't want to risk. He also thought about using the ruins of the Black Castle, but the Forbidden Forest was also a place where Quirrell Mort visited frequently and hunted unicorns to keep himself alive. And Dumbledore was also aware if Matthew left the wards. Although last year he did nothing, this year with Voldemort's presence it could be different. It wasn't impossible that the headmaster would apparate to Matthew and discover the ruins and with it the scroll, something absolutely couldn't allow. In the end, he concluded his best choice was to use a secret corridor in some unused part of the castle and seal it up from the inside so nobody could interrupt him. The only people who would be able to locate him were the twins Fred and George with the Marauder's map. But he was confident that they wouldn't be able to follow him if he sealed the entrances with rune formations. He decided he would use runes from the Elder Feudarch. With chaos runes most people couldn't break them, but he was unsure if someone like Dumbledore was able to find traces of them even if he removed them afterward. So he would use the most powerful and oldest rune system he knew besides chaos runes. Since the expertise of the twins should lay in potions and spell creation, he was confident they wouldn't be able to follow him and break his rune seal while performing the ritual. He was sure they could do it if they had enough time, but the time he needed to complete the ritual was too short. Quirrell Mort had no way to locate him or any reason, and Dumbledore would do nothing since he had no reason to spy on students while they were inside the wards. Once Matthew chooses a location, he let Sarah prepare a sealing formation in Elder Feudarch. On Friday after classes he headed for the secret corridor he chose in an unused part of the castle. It was unused since there were far fewer students in the castle than in previous centuries, because of the many deaths during the last few risings of different Dark Lords. He entered the secret passage that was located behind a statue of a scary-looking gargoyle that opened once he poked the gargoyle in the eye. The inside of the passage was dusty and dark, but quite big enough space for the isolation rune formation he would need to prepare. First Matthew carved the sealing runes on both the entrances of the secret passage, next he prepared the isolation formation. Now that everything was ready, he quickly checked his mental map to make sure nobody was close by and then began applying the 3rd level of the spell. The whole process took multiple hours. He finished early on the next morning. Matthew was quite exhausted since the spell took a lot out of him. His senses and magic control were very restricted once more. He felt as if he was staring through a light mist. He also had a new strange feeling inside of him. He was pretty sure this had to do with his soul. Since this was what the third part of his occlumency technique had to do with, and the final level of the second part is partially there to prepare himself for it and grant him the ability to slightly control his soul without the use of spells. After he once again familiarized himself to an adequate level with his body, he headed out of the corridor after removing the rune formations. He was happy that he was so careful because according to Sarah the Weasley twins tried to enter the secret passage while he was applying the spell. As he stepped out of the passage realized his mistake just now. If the twins couldn't enter they obviously would have prepared a prank for him on the entrance, but thanks to his restricted mind he realized it too slow. He already stepped out of the corridor onto something. Matthew only heard a poof and smoke raised around him. After the smoke disappeared Matthew looked at himself. His skin and clothes were now red and golden colored. After conjuring a mirror he checked his hair which was now bright red. "Oh, just you wait, it's on. I will get the both of you," cursed Matthew as he returned to the common room where he was greeted by laughter. He prepared a counter potion without trouble, but enough people had seen him that the story still spread through the castle. At lunch, both troublemakers grinned at him, while Hermione was shocked and told him to go to the teachers. Tilda scene break tilde. After this whole episode, Matthew's life continued normally. He would avenge himself in the future, but for now he had other things to do. He needed to broaden his spell repertoire. Although he had some powerful spells, most of his offensive spells were very deadly and his defensive spell was for a wide range of attacks that cost them defensive power. Over the next few weeks Matthew created some new spells with rather specific functions. Beep. The spell creation process is finished. Spell model successfully modified. Name: Cursed Chains, Weakening, Incantation, Maltina Infirmus, Range, Mid, Magical Energy Cost, 3.3 units. Description: a spell that conjures cursed chains that binds the targets. The chains are infused with a multitude of curses, although a bit darker in nature, not overly that would make it an illegal or dark spell. The curses are mainly weakening, binding, paralyzing, and shocking curses. This spell is very useful to restrict and capture a target without killing it. Beep. The spell creation process is finished. Spell model successfully modified. Name: Cursed Chains, Life Drain, Incantation, Maltina Exori, Range, Mid, Magical Energy Cost, 4.5 units. Description: a spell that conjures cursed chains that binds the targets. The chains are infused with a multitude of curses. The curses on this version of the spell are very dark in nature. The curses not only weaken and bind the target, they also slowly drain the target of its life force. Unfortunately, the life force can't be added to the casters because of the incompatibility between life forces, but it can be converted into magical energy which allows the caster to replenish his reserves while the target is slowly dying. The caster can control the rate of absorption, although the highest level is still slow and would take a few hours to kill a target with multiple decades of life remaining. Beep. The spell creation process is finished. Spell model successfully modified. Name: Physical Shield, Incantation, Corpo Aegis, Range, Mid, Magical Energy Cost, 7.5 units. Description: a high consumption spell that creates a shield that can block most physical attacks. Attacks of magical nature will just pass through the shield. The shield is designed to block huge projectiles or hits. Beep. The spell creation process is finished. Spell model successfully modified. Name: Titan Fist, Incantation, Gigangus, Range, Mid, Magical Energy Cost, 2.1 units. Description: a spell based on magical construct magic. It conjures a giant fist and hits the target with it before it dissipates a few seconds later. It may be deadly for smaller targets. Matthew was happy with his new creations since these would be very useful additions for his repertoire. He spent the next few weeks mastering them in all forms, be it with wand or without, silent or spoken, he practiced them all. Chapter 60, Birthday and Halloween. In October Matthew had his birthday. He mainly became books from Cho and his friends which he didn't read yet since Flourish and Blots would always get some new books to their assortment. His parents bought him a computer since the World Wide Web and the first web page was launched to the public on the 6th of August, 1991. His parents believed that would be something he would be interested in besides magic, and they were absolutely right. From Hermione, who last minute discovered he would have a birthday soon, he got a nice homework planner and organizer in a dark blue color. Shortly after his birthday Matthew finally completed the last level of the second part of his occlumency technique. Just a bit over 4 weeks ago he applied the spell in the secret passage. And now he mastered it. The complete second stage took him less than a half year to finish. He once again used the secret passage to remove the spell, just in case something would go wrong, but luckily everything went fine. Matthew's brain reached now a level that surpasses normal humans. No, he wasn't smarter or had a higher IQ, that wasn't what the spell was for. He had a faster processing speed on his thoughts since they didn't waste any time by using inefficient pathways. The speed he processes new information in at least doubled. Now he was able to make full use of his 5 senses because he could process far more of their information than normally. Not only that, he got far greater control over his body, mind, magic, and most importantly soul. He now was able to feel his soul and slightly control it and empower his other abilities since the soul contained another form of energy. With that he was not only able to strengthen his mental defenses but also his normal magic casting. But this was just the entry level. All he could do was use a few minuscule percentages of his soul's strength. But with the control he gained, he was now able to practice the third level of his occlumency technique. This level would take far longer than the other ones and was far more dangerous since he was practicing control over his soul. Sarah designed when she created his occlumency technique a training method that slowly allowed him to gain control over his soul and access its full strength. Unfortunately, this was also a two-sided sword. If he used too much power of his soul would collapse and he would technically die. That's why this was so dangerous and the training method was carefully created. He would need to learn to perfectly control it so he wouldn't overuse his soul. He would also gain other benefits from that, but for now, they were in the far future. Thanks to his now perfect magic control, his spells would only use half the energy than normally. Although his spells didn't become more powerful, he now was able to cast twice the amount and his reaction speed was far better than before. Only people who were empowered by artifacts or had undergone rituals should be able to react as fast as him. But most Arrows still could overpower him, but he now should be able to fight an Arrow-level wizard on an equal level. Most likely they could still beat him thanks to their experience and extensive training. Scene break. Thursday, the 31st of October, 1991. On Halloween, a delicious smell of baking pumpkin wafting through the corridors. The whole castle was decorated with pumpkins like every year, and the whole castle was in a festive mood. Today was the day where the division between life and death was the weakest. According to some historical records in the library, ancient necromancers used this day for many rituals. But most necromancers were hunted down and their records were destroyed centuries before Hogwarts was even founded. Matthew was sad that so much knowledge was lost over the ages because it was deemed too dangerous or evil. Matthew only had arithmancy, transfiguration, and herbology today. He was pretty relaxed since nobody was in danger today, since Hermione had almost nothing to do with Harry and Ron since she got sorted into Ravenclaw. He kept an eye on Kirillmort for the whole day with his mental map. Thanks to keeping an eye on him, he now realized how he smuggled the troll into the castle through the wards without alarming Dumbledore. He was utterly disappointed. Although the method Kirillmort used was very effective, it was so simple, there was no genius feat of ward breaking or even any kind of magic. All he saw from Voldemort were rather simple non-magical solutions. How he even became a Dark Lord level threat was confusing for him. All he did in the books was throw Avada Kedavras left and right. The only impressive duel was against Dumbledore, who was an over 100 years old geezer. All a bit impressive feats of magic already happened. Since he lost his body, he was an utter disappointment and only chose simple solutions. The more he learned the truth about the events in the original books, the more he wondered if he was overestimating Voldemort as a threat. But there was still the prophecy, and Matthew knew that he couldn't kill Voldemort himself since fate was an important thing in many worlds. With the existence of higher beings, which the Scroll and the Deathly Hallows proved for him, he was sure there was also an existence that enforced fate in some form. Well, Kirillmort sneaked the troll through the wards with permission from Dumbledore. He currently was transporting 2 trolls into the castle. One was left in an abandoned classroom in an unused part of the castle on the first floor, probably knocked out until Kirillmort needed his distraction. The other followed him to the forbidden 3rd floor corridor. The anti-creature wards for trolls were most likely deactivated by Dumbledore himself, since the trolls wouldn't be able to enter the castle. That was just such a simple solution. Later Kirill could just say that another troll must have followed him into the castle if he should failed to acquire the Philosopher's Stone. Since the monitoring wards didn't distinguish between creatures and humans inside the wards only during entering, Dumbledore would also not be alarmed. The rest of the day passed without trouble for Matthew, and soon the Halloween feast started. 1,000 live bats fluttered from the walls and ceiling, while 1,000 more swooped over the tables in low black clouds, making the candles in the pumpkins stutter. The feast appeared suddenly on the golden plates, as it had at the start of term banquet. Matthew made sure if everyone on the Gryffindor table was present, or if someone had replaced Hermione. But it seems everyone was here. But why do Harry and Ron look so guilty, wondered Matthew as he observed the 2. Oh shit! Gryffindor and Ravenclaw have charms together. Realized Matthew. Ron most likely insulted Hermione again. Just then Professor Quirrell came sprinting into the hall, his turban askew and terror on his face. Everyone stared as he reached Professor Dumbledore's chair, slumped against the table, and gasped, "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know." He then sank to the floor in a dead faint. That's it guys, hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Make sure you comment below what kind of stories you want to see next and any recommendation you have.